everyone. Welcome to the afternoon session. We would like to begin shortly, so kindly take your seat. For our second session on technical progress and free trade in agriculture and true food security, the conversations about agriculture and food security seldom meet. While agriculture is often depicted as something from the past, food security tends to be identified with an autarkic production policy. During this session, the possible and desirable combination between free trade and technical progress are presented as a better agenda for long-term food security. Aside from that, the Trade Barrier Index 2023 will also be launched in this session. And speaking in this session are 4 speakers, each well distinguished in their field and expertise, starting with Philip Thompson from Tholos Foundation, specializing in international intellectual property legislation and trade policy. Philip authored the International Trade Barrier Index. His writings have been published in various publications, and before joining Tholos Foundation, Philip worked at the American Legislative Exchange Council's Foreign Affairs Task Force and at the Cato Institute's of Trade Policy Center. His vast experience and expertise makes him a valuable asset in the field of intellectual property legislation and trade policy. Followed after the global launch of the Trade Barrier Index, we have Dr. Kian-Ming, former Deputy Minister of the International Trade and Industry. Dr. Kian-Ming is also the Program Director for Philosophy, Politics and Economics at Tholos University here in Malaysia. He is also currently a visiting senior fellow at ICS Yusof Ishak Institute and a former tutor member of Parliament in Malaysia. With PhD in Political Science from Duke University and Masters in Economics from University of Cambridge, prior to his political life, he was formerly a lecturer, a researcher and a consultant. Today, he'll be sharing about growing our exports in trade markets to increase food security in Malaysia. Our third speaker will be Professor Fatima Muhammad Arshad from University Putra Malaysia. Professor Fatima is also a research fellow at the Laboratory Agriculture and Food Policy Studies and a senior fellow at IDEAS. Her research focuses on agriculture marketing and policy analysis, including the role of agriculture subsidies and incentives, food security, and agriculture cooperatives. She is a member of the Malaysia's National Agriculture Society Advisory Council and has developed various models for estimating agriculture production and analyzing sector performance. Prof. Fatima also advocates for knowledge empowerment and the use of cooperatives to enhance the role of smallholders in agriculture for sustainability, equity, and growth. Last, we have Janjap van der Mark, for the Managing Director of Business Development at Big Dutchman Asia, who will be sharing on innovation and technical progress in poultry industry. Janjap has been with the company since 2015, and with his expertise in commercial livestock production and environmental sustainability, he strives to modernize and improve the agriculture industry through having precision in technologies. So he travels around the region to promote reducing carbon footprints in livestock farming and to learn about government efforts in protecting the environment. He also attends global exhibitions to stay updated on green farming trends and technologies. So after these 4 individual short presentations, we will also have a moderated panel discussion, which will be moderated by Connie Pereira, Editorial Director at Asian Agribiz. Those who know Connie would know that she has a diverse background in advertising, journalism, and airline industries. But she found her true calling in livestock agriculture industry, where she became a partner in Asian Agribiz after launching 2 new magazines and leading 10 industry-specific conferences annually. She is now organizing the company's inaugural Alternative Protein Conference in Bangkok. Connie's impressive capabilities and track record in the industry make her a true powerhouse and a leader in her field. Without further ado, I would like to invite the first presenter, Thompson. A round of applause, please.
Good afternoon. It's really exciting to be here with all of you, and thank you to our host, Center for Market Education, to present the 2023 Trade Barrier Index. We started the Trade Barrier Index in 2019, and we've come out every 2 years with a new edition, so this is our 3rd edition. And we started out in 2019 because during a lot of the rhetoric around trade policy was focused on power politics or trade deficits and surpluses, and we want to draw that attention back to what really matters is those trade barriers between individuals trading their goods and services across borders. So the Trade Barrier Index has 4 main pillars. The first 3 are the most direct forms of trade barriers. So they're tariffs, non-tariff barriers, services restrictions. And then we have a facilitation component that looks at kind of the minimum behind the border measures that are necessary to allow trade to happen. There's going to be digital freedom, logistics performance, property rights, and membership in regional trade agreements. And why we have the Trade Barrier Index, like we said, is really about preserving people's rights to trade their goods and services and create mutually beneficial agreements with others across borders on their own terms. But we also have positive correlations with economic and social indicators. That countries with lower trade barriers, they tend to have more freedom, more prosperity, higher levels of human development. Countries with higher trade barriers tend to have more perception of corruption, abuse of the press, and illegal trade. So if you're not convinced by the human rights argument, there's other arguments for pursuing open trade and competitive markets. So this is what the ratings look like overall. We have 88 countries in the index that covers 96% of GDP and more than about 72% of the world's population. And so on the index, unlike the property rights index, the lower score means you have lower trade barriers. The higher score, you have more trade barriers. At the front, we have Singapore and New Zealand, and at the back, we have Russia and India. And this is what it looks like for Malaysia compared to the other regions of the world. Malaysia is in the East Asia and Pacific region. And you can see its score is lower than the average for the region and lower than the world average. So it's kind of in the middle, a little bit better than the middle. And then we're going to look at compared where's Malaysia in each component of the index. So for tariff barriers, we have 3 indicators. The tariff MFN, most favored nation tariff rate score, the percent of lines that are duty-free, and the total number of tariff lines. So here, Malaysia, and compared to other regions of the world, is pretty low, just behind North America. Its score is better than the average for the region. And the region is just behind Japan and before Taiwan. The measure that kind of stands out here for Malaysia is the number of tariff lines. This kind of indicates that the government is creating specific tariff lines to protect certain national products. For instance, there could be like specific strains of durian or apple, and they create a specific tariff line to either add tariffs on this specific type of fruit, or they create a non-tariff barrier to say, these can be imported from other countries, but has to have a certification to approve that first. which takes us to non-tariff barriers. So here, Malaysia, upper middle income countries, low income countries, really use fewer non-tariff barriers than high income countries. Malaysia is kind of in the middle compared to the world averages, which is on the left here. And we look at the number of measures that are applied to all countries and applied bilaterally. These non-tariff barriers are kind of the fine print on what can be imported and how, what quantities of these can be imported, how much electricity they can use, what are the measures that are there to ensure they're safe or not. What stands out here, I think, is that high-income countries use a lot of these non-tariff barriers. The United States is kind of thought of as a free trade country, but the United States score has really dropped this year because it uses the most non-tariff barriers, followed by the European Union and China. Here, what stands out is Malaysia has a little bit more safeguards applied to other countries than the other similar income groups, and that's just really on three things. There's two different steel products and ceramic tiles. And then these are the services restrictions. These are going to be the measures that prevent foreign businesses from operating in the country on their own terms. Compared to the world average, Malaysia's score is higher than the world average and it's higher than the regional average. And when we look at compared to the region, it's just behind Taiwan and before Vietnam. So all these different sectors that are in this score, there's room for improvement. These are restrictions on how professionals can work in the country, the entertainment sector, telecom restrictions. We're going to talk about digital trade barriers in a second. There's a measure in Malaysia for cloud services. If they need to be incorporated in the country, the board has to have a certain number of nationals on the board. And these are kind of restrictions that we see across the upper middle income countries and across Asia, which are sometimes considered as coerced technology transfers that limit or require incorporation into a country and limit ownership. Sorry. On the trade facilitation component, we look at property rights, logistics performance, digital trade, and membership and regional trade agreements. The European Union, Western Europe, they always are going to have a whole lot more of free trade agreements because of how the European Union came to be. But there's a lot of room in Malaysia to lower that score. Malaysia should get involved in opportunities like the Comprehensive Pacific Trade Partnership, or also there's an opportunity with the IPEF negotiations that are going on right now with the United States and 13 other countries. There's also property rights can be improved and logistics. And these are often associated with illegal trade, which is one of the correlations we see with the Property Rights Index as well. That when countries really improve these institutional measures, that there is less illegal trade going on and more enforcement institutionally. And right now, there's a lot of non-tariff barriers popping up in Europe that would affect trade from Indonesia and Malaysia, especially concerning illegal trade on the forestry products, illegal wildlife trade, and other things like that, and illegal cigarettes. And I just said facilitation. Oh, these are the digital trade restrictions. So we create a measure of digital trade restrictions to include in the facilitation component, because it's really hard to conduct any type of trade right now without having an online digital component. Right now, there's been a big competition between Western Europe and China, and who's creating the most digital trade restrictions. Europe came out ahead this year with a Data Act, Digital Service Act, Digital Markets Act. They have half a dozen different restrictions on how different companies are moderated based on their size, how they're fined. Malaysia's kind of stayed out of that. The restrictions that come from China and are used as model legislation throughout Asia tend to be more focused on security than privacy, which is what we see in Europe. Right now, there's the yellow is what's bigger for Malaysia right now. That's going to be content localization that has to do with that cloud services restriction requiring certain ownership to be held by Malaysians. And there's also a content moderation component. Part of that legislation requires that cloud services or online platforms comply with a 1998 Multimedia Act, which says they have to restrict content that is annoying or obscene or harassing. And depending on who's in the government in different countries, that could mean different things. Lastly, a main part of freedom to trade is that you have your comparative advantage, and you can use that to your opportunity to focus on where you're competitive, and you can import your comparative advantage from the comparative advantage of other countries, so you can be more efficient and leverage your opportunities. But what we see with the trade barrier index is countries that are more protective, which is India and Russia. They have 20% of the world's population, but they only produce 5% of global GDP. But countries that have the lowest trade barriers, the 6 countries with the lowest trade barriers, they only have 2.6% of the world's population, but they produce 11% of global GDP. And this is not, we have a big argument in the United States right now about unequal outcomes with trade openness. And I think this really demonstrates that there are unequal outcomes, and it's that countries that trade freely produce a lot more efficiently and achieve higher levels of human development, competitiveness, and innovation. So thank you so much. That's the Trade Barrier Index. And you can always go to the website, tradebarriersindex.org, and you can compare countries and see where the different trade barriers are. Thank you.
Thank you again. For our second presentation, I'd like to invite Dr. Kian-Ming.
Hi everyone, hope you guys have eaten lunch and not too full so that you can listen to what I hope will be an interesting discussion. Thank you very much Carmelo for inviting me. Just for sort of like context, I'm not a food security expert, but I have had some exposure in terms of my previous portfolio as Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry, and also have certain exposure to the kind of policy documents that different government ministries have created and written in Malaysia, and with some understanding of some of the strengths and weaknesses in that context. So I'm going to talk about food security from the perspective of building up Malaysia's own export as well as trading capabilities. And I hope that I can spark some discussion in terms of maybe a more counterintuitive approach with regards to achieving food security. So I'm going to go through these 5 points. The first one is looking at some of the traditional thinking of self-sufficiency levels as well as food security. And this is the kind of traditional thinking that prevails in the Malaysian context, especially on the part of government. Second point I want to make is actually to change the script. Rather than to look for ways in which we can achieve SSLs by producing higher outputs for the domestic market, I want to look at how market-driven forces can actually help in terms of providing incentives for companies and for individuals to look for higher value products to market as an export product, and also perhaps to start off locally with the intention of growing the market beyond Malaysian shores. And I'll use examples from the rice as well as the milk industry. And then the third point I want to make is to show a counter example of how to not achieve food security in the Malaysian context, which would be destroying our export markets. How actually protectionist measures may help in the short term, but will harm our domestic production capacity, and by restricting some of these export markets. And this happened during the ban on chicken and egg exports that occurred last year. The fourth point I want to make is actually something that has not really happened much in Malaysia, but perhaps a little bit more common in other countries, which is to encourage foreign direct investment in the agri-food sector. And then the last one would be to be open to other substitutes in terms of food substitutes. Yeah. So traditional thinking. This is part and parcel of the National Agri-Food Policy 2.0, 2021 to 2030, was launched in 2021 when Ismail Sabri was the Prime Minister then. And what I found out when I went through these 200-300 pages, there are two documents actually. One is a policy document, and another one is an action plan document. What I found out was that the aspirational targets are actually very good. So, for example, growth rate of 5.0% for the agriculture sector, by 2030, increasing contribution, on the agriculture side to GDP, very nice aspirational numbers. Whether or not we can achieve it, that's another question. So these are the SSL targets for different commodities, different products in Malaysia. Beras is rice, buah-buahan is fruits, sayur-sayuran is vegetables. And you can see very, very aggressive growth targets for 2025 and 2030. It's actually a very, and then on the action plan, these are the kind of big picture sort of like strategies that I've translated into English to put these action plans into place so that we can achieve SSL and increase our domestic food security. Very nice, modernizing and smart agriculture using technology, strengthening the domestic market, especially in terms of having, better marketing for some of our local products. Developing talent, because many of the farmers in Malaysia are growing old already. Younger generation doesn't want to take part. Talking about building a strong institutional framework and ecosystem for businesses in the agri sector to thrive, and then also to improve sustainable agricultural practices, especially in the context of climate change, which the ministry did identify as one of the main challenges for the agricultural sector in Malaysia. And then there are subsector plans: paddy, rice, fruits, vegetables, livestock, fish and aquaculture. So it's actually a very, very good plan, very detailed, if only it can be implemented properly. But this is, again, I say, a very traditional way of thinking, right? And if you look at the kind of CAGR growth rates across all these sectors that were identified, this is what the ministry calculated. I highlight the 2010 to 2020 targets. Not targets, sorry, actual production. And you can see the CAGR is actually negative for almost all of the categories. The highest CAGR is actually 0.37 for vegetables, right? So if, let's say, the CAGR for all these categories are not very positive for 2010 to 2020, what are the factors that will change the outcomes for the National Agriculture Policy 2.0, 2021 to 2030? I think this is the sort of like a billion-dollar question, and I'm not quite sure whether the execution plans under this National Agri-Food Policy can be executed in a way that would be able to achieve the goals that were highlighted in the in this plan earlier. And these are the issues and challenges. So the ministry is actually very well aware of these kinds of challenges: low production efficiency, limited high-value products, threats from national disaster, lack of youth involvement, which I talked about earlier, limited financial assistance, and then impact of different crises, whether it's climate or food prices globally, that sort of a thing, right? So, yeah, so that's the sort of like traditional way of thinking. I'll leave it maybe to the discussion session. I think Professor Fatima has done a lot of work on the rice sector, looking at the kind of policy challenges and failures that have happened in the past, and also what we can do to improve it. But traditional thinking probably won't be able to allow us to achieve the kind of SSL that the ministry highlighted earlier. But what I do want to highlight is a very important distinction as part of changing the script, which is as a high SSL or a low SSL does not necessarily lead to a high score in terms of food security. Right? I think this is something that maybe is not so intuitive, especially when we ask the public. If you ask the public, oh, how do we achieve food security? Oh, we need to produce more rice. We need to produce more milk, and so on and so forth, right? But if you look at the food security rankings for some of these countries in Asia, the highest rank by some of these measures, especially the overall ranking, is actually a country like Singapore, right? That doesn't produce much of its food, but has a very high food security score because it is able to mitigate a lot of the risk by having diverse import sources, for example, right? Malaysia actually doesn't fare too badly. It's at number 6, and it's highlighted here in green that countries like Thailand and Vietnam, despite being rice exporters, actually have a lower food security index compared to Malaysia, right? So I think this is where we need to change the script in terms of thinking differently about this SSL as well as food security. And I want to use the example of paddy. These are, in addition to what Professor Fatima has done together with ideas, for the entire paddy subsidy, rice and subsidy kind of a landscape to reform it. Khazanah has also done a pretty good study in 2019, looking at this, this particular point that I pull out, which is looking forward. The nation has established a certain level of rice production capacity. It's about 63% SSL. It is possible that the nation may not need to target a high SSL if it comes at expense of other factors, right? So you want to, to grow SSL, you need basically more land. And more land, you need more irrigation, you need more infrastructure development, which again in Malaysia's capacity now as a country that's moving into high income status, that may not be something that we want to focus on, right? So in fact, a slightly lower SSL with a lower number of farmers, but higher yield and quality grains produced per farmer may provide a higher income. Right? And this is something that that Khazanah Research Institute advocated for, and they followed up with a recently published study, November 2022, looking at the paddy and rice industry in Sabah and Sarawak, whereby the specialty and heirloom paddy varieties in Sabah and Sarawak was advocated as possibly, that can lead to the rise of the next Musang King in our country in terms of the value that they can sell, not in the domestic market, but especially in the export market, because these are heirloom specialty rice. And I happen to know a group of young people who have taken on this idea to produce or to bring, to market and to bring heirloom rice varieties, from different parts of Sarawak to sell to high-end grocery stores in Malaysia, and also looking to expand to the export market. I tried to buy some of their stuff online, and a lot of it has been sold out. So I asked one of the founders, and they said business has been pretty good, but there are also regulatory structures that makes it difficult for them as well. One of which is, if you want to export rice in Malaysia, you need a permit. Right? So for many of the farmers in East Malaysia, they are not able to actually get together the paperwork to be able to export the rice, right? And this is where these kinds of business opportunities can come into play with the help of perhaps greater liberalization of some of these regulations, right? Another example, for those of you who may not be familiar with this place called Sekinchan in northern Selangor, it is one of the most productive paddy fields in the whole of Malaysia. they can harvest up to 3 times a year, as opposed to twice a year for most other paddy fields. And they've expanded into things like branding their own rice and having tourism activities in the paddy fields itself, having museums and things like that. And I think this may be a way in which we can attract young people to come into agri-food as well, to combine agri-food together with tourism, right? And this may seem like something that's very niche, but when I show you the next example, it's something that it'll show you that something that's niche can grow into something that's pretty big, which is the milk market in Malaysia. And this is Farm Fresh, was listed in the Malaysian stock market sometime last year, achieved a valuation of 2 billion ringgit. And they started off as a very small enterprise. Khazanah invested in them, gave them some assistance, and now they've grown into a very large enterprise. They are exporting to Singapore, their main export market, and looking to expand to Brunei and Indonesia. They bought other brands, such as an ice cream brand recently. Scoop? Inside Scoop. And then they've also expanded into tourism, agri-tourism related products around the Klang Valley. So this is something niche that can grow into something big. Similarly with the whole, paddy variety idea from this Sabah and Sarawak. The third thing I want to talk about is export markets. This is Singapore Food Agency, emphasizing that Singapore actually imports more chicken from Brazil compared to Malaysia, right? And as a result of the ban of exports of chicken and eggs from Malaysia to other countries, and this of course affected Singapore the most. What happened was that Singapore immediately went to look for other sources around the region, Thailand, Brazil, Australia, Indonesia. And what happened was that Malaysia suddenly found itself to have more chickens. A lot of the contracts had to be broken, and they found that they could not export to the same level. And this is important because when you export, you get a higher price in places like Singapore and other countries. And this actually allows chicken and egg farmers in Malaysia to subsidize some of their domestic operations, which is, again, something that we need to think about when we think about SSL, just producing for the local market. I think we need to have a change of script in that thinking, right? Fourth point, FDI in agriculture sector. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of this company called Baladna. It started off in the Middle East, looking at trying to achieve self-sufficiency in the Middle East, in Qatar, and it was so successful in achieving these targets that it's actually expanded into other countries. It has signed a MOU with FGV to produce milk and other related products in Malaysia, and it's looking for other places in Southeast Asia as well. So FDI, we generally think of it in manufacturing in Malaysia, but it's equally important to think about it from an agri-food perspective. But there's certain domestic regulations and, of course, government measures that need to be addressed when we talk about this. And the last point I want to make is, we talk about rice a lot in Malaysia because that's our staple. But in a recent issue of The Economist, they're talking about the crisis that the rice industry is facing. And in countries in Asia, it may make sense because of the kind of heavy, agriculture, irrigation and other land inputs that are needed for the rice industry. It may be, strategic to shift to other sources of carbs. India is looking at maybe millet as an alternative, and then that uses less water. And then, when we look at examples from South Korea, even South Korea, the consumption of rice is actually decreasing. Right, so this can be part and parcel of a larger strategy to think out of the box in terms of achieving, food security in the country without necessarily resorting to the SSL kind of thinking that I think many governments, especially the one in Malaysia, goes through. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the insightful presentation. Now, I would like to welcome Professor if you're ready. Can we get a round of applause for Professor Fatima? Okay, is this correct?
Good afternoon, everyone. One day I was eating nasi lemak in one mamak stall and was reading newspaper, and the issue was about market intervention, and then the article was written by Carmelo, and he mentioned Hayek in the article. So it makes my nasi lemak taste better. All right, there you go, guys. My role today is trade and Malaysia's food security, the past and the future. All right. I will take you along and you will understand what I meant. I'm sorry that I didn't talk about trade barriers, but talking about food security and trade, these are my narratives. Mon, look at our food security, how we fare, past trend in food trade, what does it indicate, the past in the future, as well as charting Malaysia's food future, right? Okay, these are just data, but what I want to emphasize, look at our SSL, all of them are going down. Yeah, all of them are going down, even eggs, poultry meat, and so on. That's why YB's data, thank you so much, YB, for your presentation. All the rate of growth is negative. That's how we fare all these years, and our dependency on import very high for mutton, beef, vegetables, even vegetables, right? And what it shows is that the consumption outgrows production, and we are continuing dependent on imports, right? But before I go further, why food, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, some people will say, oh, why not? Our global food security index is not bad, 39 in the world. But mind you, food is basic human right. We need food because of nutrition security. I will explain later. We need food because we are rich in biodiversity. We're number 2 after Brazil. If you take 1 meter of land, you can find all sorts of diversity there. And we need to enhance our biodiversity. We need food to make the local or the rural areas dynamic. And of course, the science benefit, environmental benefit, landscape, green landscape, yeah, and of course, other reasons, right? So that's why we need food, right? There you are. These are just some example why the prices have gone up, inflation and real income has gone down during pandemic time. These are just some data. I'm sure you can access this data. And yeah, I am in the M40, but I have slipped into B40 under pandemic, right? All right, affordability is a big issue, right? We are very happy to see that UNICEF did a study, and these are the data that they produce. The income level, 60% of them, experience reduction in income and so on, right? Very sad. And nutrition, yeah, nutrition. What they have discovered in that among the poor in the rural area, in the urban areas, there is an increase of 40% in noodles because they can't afford rice, they can't afford vegetables and so on. So, and also they have discovered 1 in 5 children are stunted. That is in Putrajaya, and the data shows our children are stunted. Yeah, very sad. And this is higher than Zimbabwe and Swaziland. That's our nutrition security. Let's look at our past trend in food trade, right? There you go. That's the story. The deficit is expanding. By last year, our deficit has increased to 31 billion. Before pandemic, it's about 19. So in 1990, it's about 1 billion. Now it has grown to 31 billion. Our import is increasing, but our export is growing at a very slower rate, right? So when I adjusted that data to say CPI and population, this is how the graph look like. So meaning population and prices are affecting our trade, import and export. Even if you look at the export-import ratio, not much change. In fact, yes, decline. That's the state of affair of our food sector. Right, there you go. There you go. Live animals, 0-1, meat and meat preparation, except for live animal, which are poultry and eggs and pork meat. The rest are all in red. There you go. Cereals, particularly rice, vegetables and fruits, as well as sugar, coffee, tea, feed stuff, right? All over the years, we have depended on import. So these are the takeaway from this data. All right. Almost all food items showed increasing deficit, with the exception of poultry, eggs, pork, and edible products, which is cocoa-based food, or our margarine, yeah, and oil palm food base. We had a balanced food trade plan under Mayudian before, and we did a study on this, and they intended to achieve 1.2 billion in 2010, but failed miserably, and the trade deficit stood at 12 billion. Look at these red sentences, yeah? Number one, Malaysia imports food that she can produce. Mind you, we still import cabbages, that humble cabbages, and we introduced AP since 1980. So somebody is making money out of that AP. We imported cabbages 1980, since 1980, and we imported them from China and Indonesia. Very sad, isn't it? We can't even produce our own cabbages. Number two, Malaysia is number 2 in the world with regards to biodiversity. We have good natural endowment. We have Chaya Surya, sunshine, enough water, enough river, enough land, enough biomass, yet we are a net importer. And not only that, Malaysia imported both food output, yeah, cereals and so on, but worse still, all the inputs are imported, YB, take note. Meaning, seeds, breeds, fertilizer, chemicals, medicine, soybean, corn, feedstuff for livestock, machines and parts, and not mentioning laborers from Bangladesh, from Indonesia, from Myanmar, and what have you. So it's no wonder our food is not moving because of this, right? If the minister asks me, I'm always in that committee, minister asks me what went wrong with our food sector, simple. Yield does not improve, cost of production has increased, particularly after the pandemic, and all input items are imported. Therefore, our margin is small. And how are we going to attract youngsters into it if that is the situation? There you go, our food export pattern, right? This graph, yeah, the one on your right-hand side, looking at the what we net import. There are so many items, but the export that we are able to export to the world include cocoa base, as well as oil palm base, but the rest are all imported, okay? The past and the future, what do I mean by that? Path dependence. YB, you took political science, I'm sure you have heard of this term. Path dependence means our future is determined by our past, the legacy of our past, meaning what our colonial masters have dictated us. Look at this graph. Yeah, the yellow one is oil palm. This is what we call normal archetypes of commodity life cycle. Yeah, of course, oil palm is doing very well. But remember, this is the year where we set the limit of 6.5 million hectares. But luckily, even down to about 5.7 million hectares because of pandemic. But it will be, the ceiling will be set at 6.5 because we want to maintain half of our land for forests, yeah, to ensure a good environment. So oil palm will reach its ceiling, and look at rubber, yeah, the green one. This is what we call exponential decay. It's decaying slowly. And look at our precious crop, cocoa. We have missed it. We have missed very big opportunity there. And this is what we call it went overshoot and collapse, or boom and bust archetypes. Okay, so our so-called golden crops are losing their shine. Just want to show you what happened to our crop mix. By now, 85% of the area are oil palm. Right? If you look at this diagram, this is Sankey diagram. I use R to plot the Sankey diagram. You see oil palm in the 80s, the green one, about 2 million. Now it has close to about 5.7 million or 5.9 million 2 years ago. So almost 80% are oil palm. That is not good because cause of so many repercussions, right? So in the past, we had policy biases toward industrial crop at the expense of food. Industrial crops are land intensive, and of course, they are extractive. Not much has been returned to the soil, except now we are doing it, but lower value added per hectare compared to fisheries or even compared to vegetables. Food crops area is declining, but value added are increasing. And what the data shows from the publication is that fisheries and vegetables have high value added per hectare compared to oil palm. Right. Charting Malaysia's food future. I need your input here. Okay. This is what FAO has concluded. The source of productivity in the future, 80% comes from R&D. It's not land-based or any other. I mean, of course, we need the resources, but not as much as R&D. The proof, maybe, you know, we can see Israel, for example. Half of the area is arid land, but they are the largest producer of fresh produce in European countries, and of course Holland, and of course China, of course Vietnam. After Doi Moi, look at them. All right. IFRI, most effective strategies for food security. This is from Shagan Fan. He was the director of IFRI, R&D and infrastructure development. And I would like to propose YB in the future, because of the decline in rubber, cocoa, and so on. Food first policy. We should focus and give full commitment for food for the reason I mentioned earlier. And there's no other way but through R&D and extension. Yeah. We need to revamp our R&D agenda. Productivity improvement through digitalization, advanced technology. There are evidences of you know, how drones can help with fertilizer distribution. And do you remember during Turkish problem during the earthquake, the Chinese court brought drones, and they used the drones to turn on light during nighttime, you know, because, and then they were able to help the victims. And Turkey, Turkey ordered a few more drones to lighten the area. So that's another use of drones. Of course, IoT and of course AI, ML, and so on. Automation is very minimal. Mechanization is very minimal. And we need startups or pemula, and of course e-business. Remember this the current dumping of vegetables? One reason is that there is not enough e-business or online application to help distribute those vegetables, right? And revamp, as I said earlier, revamp R&D ecosystem, close collaboration of university, private sector, farmer. If you want to ask me why the reason we are not, we are very good at coming up with scopus papers, but not much innovation because we are busy chasing ranking. That's the reason. So we need to change our paradigm first. And I think we have been insular, YB. We are not collaborating researchers from China, researchers from Vietnam, researchers from Thailand to help us with our agriculture. And I think things have changed. The whole world is moving towards, you know, not only mitigation, but to address the climate change problem. And this is opportunities for us, for Malaysia. We do have scientists, we have so much biomass, you know, lots of biology. We can be champion if we want to. If you're serious about it, climate smart agriculture, technology smart agriculture, because of this. We are rich in biomass, we are rich in biodiversity, all right? And also I believe in, as I mentioned by our chairperson just now, I believe in cooperatives. And I was able to reduce YB, the minimum number for cooperative members has been reduced to 50 to 20. The average for the world is 5 YB. So with 20, maybe 3-4 houses can become cooperative. And of course, we need startups. I Google startups agriculture in Malaysia. There are not many YB. Whereas in Indonesia, if you guys look at startup in Indonesia, they have a startup for fisheries, for agricultural produce. And they were able to help the small fishermen, the small farmers to export their produce to the world. That's the power of this digital platform. But we have not reached that level yet. And this one, YB, this is very important. Since we import almost 100%, we must come up with our own input. I'm not saying that we must compete with Bayer, compete with Monsanto, and so on. But at least, I think in Thailand, they import about only 30%, but we import 90%. That is why we are not able to compete with them. We must develop our own input development to reduce costs and establish local input market, and of course, minimize public monopoly. In the case of paddy and rice, I tell you, because of a total monopoly, total control of wholesale, retail, milling, zero innovation. We only have rice, YB, only rice, paddy, bihun, and bedak sejuk. That is all. Compared to hundreds of products in Thailand, compared to hundreds of products of rice-based in Japan. particularly in Japan, rice wine is the most expensive wine in Japan. That is the role of, when you increase the value added of this product, then the value of paddy will be increased as well, and the industry will become dynamic. And of course, minimize public monopoly. Don't forget about this. Most people forget about this. Centralized input distribution. In the case of NAFAS, they have been distributing fertilizer YB for almost 50 years. The same thing with RISDA. No wonder our input sector development has not grown all these years, because somebody is monopolizing the distribution of input. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Fatima. Now, for the fourth speaker, I would like to invite Yanyap van der Mar. A round of applause to welcome him, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Carmelo, thank you for inviting us to this event. And thank you for your very inspiring lecture just now. It gave me a lot of thought as well. The introduction has been done. Let me go straight forward. A little bit about Big Dutchman so that you have an understanding what we do. We have been for 31 years here in Malaysia. And this is our hub here in Klang. And we cover the whole of Asia, the whole APEC, except for China. So we brought also our OEMs, our suppliers, to Malaysia and surrounding Asian countries to supply parts and commodities to us to provide all the systems and solutions to the region. So it brings immediately a lot of extra business into the country, positioning ourselves here in Asia for the region. What do? We provide total solutions for livestock farming, basically egg production and poultry farming. That goes from management, production and environment, and all the aspects in between. I will not highlight those aspects now. So we are basically the original design manufacturer, but we have a lot of suppliers that provide the commodity parts to us. So basically we pack it together and we ship it out to our customers and build turnkey on site. This is an example of a livestock farm. This is a layer production farm. Just to give you a bit of an idea, this would be an ideal picture, and this is what we are pursuing, of course, in the whole region. A very biosecure farm. You can't go in with trucks and people. You have to go through biosecurity corridors. The eggs are being transported automatically to egg production, to the egg collection areas. Central feeding is outside of the livestock perimeter and brought through conveyors and silos to the farms. So no people in, no trucks in. And the topic of today, which I will highlight a little bit later, is the collection of waste. This is a big problem. And we want to collect the waste now in a very secure way, away from rain, and keep it dry and turn it into something valuable, into something sellable, and an extra revenue stream for our farmers, basically. With all this and all the biosecurity, we have to go into the cloud because it's very difficult to access the sites. Fully biosecure, you can't get in with people. So we have to remotely also control the service and issues and alarms that go on these farm complexes. So all the production and management information is collected, and as well we are now moving into collecting data of waste and emissions, so that with that together we can get accreditation through life cycle assessments and approach the investors, the banks for green financing, and the global companies. So this is what we all collect. We'll not go into that now. So this is a complete platform that can be used and to benchmark also regionally. There's more globalization going on. Companies are getting bigger and they have to compare KPIs. But this all gives us opportunity. So we really have to go from the farm into the cloud. And this is what we're doing on a daily basis. Going straight to the topic of today, this is what we see happening all over the place now. Waste is coming out of these farm sites, and it is a huge problem. It's a problem for them to get rid of them. It's a cost. And how can we turn this around? Since 5-6 years that we are here that I'm here in Malaysia, actually 8 years, but since 5-6 years, this topic have come on the agenda every time I visit a farmer or a customer. And the meeting ends up in, can you help me with the waste? And there's a variety of issues that come with it: handling, smell, odor issues, major emission, water pollution, runoff, authority enforcement. They also do not know how to tackle it. So I guess it has to come from all sides, in the industry as well as the government and authorities. So these are a few of the major challenges that we are facing in Asia, and of course also Malaysia. We're dealing with the biggest population base here in Asia. There's a scarcity of land, enormous high food demand, as a result intensive agriculture, and as a consequence thereof, again, increased use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, which is never good. Rising animal feed demand and cost, biosecurity, in this case it's avian influenza and African swine fever. Climate change issues, rising energy demand and labor scarcity and reduced mobility of people, which we have all experienced during the pandemic. This all gives a huge pressure on the environment and sustainability, of course. So what do we see as a market trend at the moment in Asia? Chemical fertilizer and manure waste are the largest and growing greenhouse gas emission contributors within agriculture. And then agriculture is number 2 after fossil fuels and energy. Billions are going to be spent on greenhouse gas emissions control towards 2050. All countries have pledged to be carbon neutral by 2050. And the APEC chemical fertilizer growth is projected to be $116 billion by 2028. So we are dropping chemical fertilizers on the agricultural grounds in this value, and then you have to imagine that 25%, probably more, runs off. It goes into the groundwater, it goes into your waterway system, it comes into the ocean, with all the issues moving forward. We need chemical fertilizers because we need to produce food. But this is not, if this growth keeps on going, it will only get worse. So the organic fertilizer market is expected to grow to 2.8 billion by 2028 in the APEC, but I think this could go way faster. And the way to do this in a faster pace is to provide technologies which are affordable and justifiable, so that the livestock farmers can turn the waste into an organic fertilizer which is sellable on the market and can compete with chemical fertilizer. So this is what we are looking into. Of course, more regulation expected. Government sanctioning subsidies, incentives and funds, banks moving into green financing projects. All the exhibitions I'm at here in Asia, banks are approaching us that, hey, what are you guys doing, and how can we finance green projects? Feed costs are on the rise, energy costs are on the rise, and labor scarcity, obviously. Very interesting, the chemical fertilizer companies at the moment, they are seriously looking into expanding their portfolio from chemical fertilizers to organic. And that is actually a very good opportunity for us, because they want to go green as well. And they are thinking about pulling big volumes of organic fertilizer to their sites and then fortifying or spiking it to higher nutrient levels, NPK we call that, nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. And that would be a good development, because then we get the best of both. And this gives an opportunity to the livestock farmers to get rid of the manure for a value and develop an extra revenue stream. As well, that we are more conscious and sustainable of applying fertilizers to the agricultural lands. Now, everybody has seen these announcements and messages in the newspapers or on the internet. all about carbon footprint, greenhouse gases, greenhouse emission and emission control, carbon footprint to 2050. It's only on the daily agenda basically, and it just doesn't stop. So yeah, the long-term effects of intensive agriculture are this, and you can see it everywhere. Actually, a couple of weeks ago I was traveling from Melbourne to Brisbane, and I was flabbergasted what I saw, because it's 1.5 hour flight, and from Melbourne to Brisbane there's 1 hour. I hardly saw a patch of forest. It is just grasslands, cattle, wheatlands. It is dry. Yeah, I guess we deserve, we get what we deserve. I mean, if we talk about climate change, that's happening. And 2 days ago there was, what was it? There was snow even in the whole area there. So it goes from extremes, from floodings to bushfires to snow. It's amazing. So this is the price development of the chemical fertilizers from pre-pandemic and Ukraine war to now. This is actually giving us an opportunity to change the dynamics, I think, because the prices have been spiking up to 2-3 times, and that gives us a possibility to produce organic fertilizer with a competitive pricing and use that into the game. So what do we do as Big Dutchmen as a proposition? Livestock farmers have an increasing waste problem, turn waste manure into organic fertilizer. Livestock farms require technology to produce organic fertilizer, so offer affordable solutions to treat the livestock waste and clean the emissions with it. That is important. So here we see the growth of organic fertilizer towards 2030 is projected at 14.1, but I think this could be way higher if we come up with the right solutions into the market, to the livestock farmers, and the governments would also support this. So we need to look at it in a different way. We have to turn liability into assets. So the manure is not anymore a waste. It is a source of energy, fertilizer and protein. Organic fertilizer as such is not enough, does not have enough nutrient value to satisfy the plant growth. So we need to add chemicals to it. But as organic fertilizers have a 60% organic matter, and with mixing it with nutrients, chemical nutrients, you have the right balance. And you revitalize the soil, you keep the soil healthy. So we see a possibility here, and a proposition to the first priority is to clean the waste of the farms, solve that pollution problem, and secondly, to turn that waste into profits. So we have to come up with technology to help these farmers to produce compost. These go hand in hand. One does not go without the other. So this is very important. So we can create a circular economy. Crops produce feed. Feed is fed to the livestock. Livestock produces manure. And we can turn the manure through composting into organic fertilizer and bring that back to the crops. So here you have your circular economy. This is what we want to achieve for the future generation, of course, as much as possible organic farming. We see that also if you go to the Cameron Highlands, a lot of vegetables and tomatoes and strawberries are produced there. But go and ask the farmers, do you eat those products yourself? Some will tell you, I'm not eating it myself because I'm putting so much pesticides on it. That's scary. So, very briefly, the poultry produce wet manure. We have to pre-dry the manure, not going into that technology now. We compost it, and we can then pack it or bag it, or we either pelletize it and bag it then and produce pellets to supply to the agricultural lands. In the meantime, you can spike it or fortify it, so add chemicals so that you have the right nutrient value with the compost. This is a drying system, just an example to show you. We compost it, we use vertical towers, so we use gravity as well. We are looking at solutions that have the lowest energy cost to produce and transform manure into compost, so that it can be competitive in the market. This is an example of an air scrubber. So basically we take the emissions out of the composting machines. This very high concentration of ammonia. It pollutes the environment, of course. But we can take that out, we can have it react with sulfur acid and make sure that the emissions are basically minimal. We store and cure the compost, and consequently you have a product that has no pathogens, no E. coli, so you can transport it. High organic matter and the NPK values as such. Mostly for rice or palm plantations you need 10 to 15 per PNK. So we have to increase that. We can pelletize it as a consequence. And we have done with Sirim here in Malaysia, we have done a life cycle assessment. So we have basically been looking at the emission when you do traditional process of getting wet manure and apply it to the paddy lands. How much methane, nitrous oxide and CO2 exposes to the environment. And we have done the same, looking at applying the technology. This is for 100,000 layers. And then you calculate how much CO2 emission you reduce applying this technology. This is important also to be able to get carbon credits later on in carbon trading. So we have the green label here in Malaysia through My Hijau and Sirim, and we are certified for that. Just to have an idea for you, one compost tower is more than the equivalent of 800 solar panels. So if you have both, even better. My Hijau certificate, and at the moment the action is that we want to have the international life cycle assessment and capture all these data in the cloud, so that gives the possibility or provides the possibility for farmers and conglomerates to talk to banks and investors and get carbon credits for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Now that all 4 presentations have been delivered, I would like to invite our moderator, Connie Pereira, and again all of the speakers from the previous presentation to come in front.
I think I can manage.
Nah, just an extra microphone in case needed.
Yes, JJ, I can manage.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the Center for Market Education and to Carmelo for inviting all of us. We are in the, should I say, the graveyard hour, where people usually go to sleep after lunch. But I think the conversations that we had this afternoon were so stimulating. It may have been a bit depressing when we look at our SSL and sustainability. And when we look at innovation, I think, you know, that is so interesting, because when you innovate, you really are thinking and moving forward. So if our SSL is slipping, you know, what does that indicate? It is a bit of a dismal situation, but I think JJ gave us a bit of a silver lining towards the end of our discussions this afternoon. Now, we started off with Philip talking about Malaysia's trade barriers in general and the restrictions, the many restrictions that we have to trade globally and within the region as well. Of course, I would have liked to see trade promotion rather than a trade promotion index rather than a trade barrier index, but I'm sure that will come in sometime soon. And when we looked at Professor Kian-Ming's presentation, it was pretty dismal actually when you look at the at what we need to actually quantum leap and raise our productivity and output and value for the products up to 2030. We haven't achieved much, but I think if we adopt an innovative mindset, we can actually go forward with this. Prof. Fatima, your one thing that came up, you know, the Badak Sejuk, I haven't heard of it for a long time. Yeah, I know, but it is so sad. But actually looking at the rice, the novel rice quality products that we have coming up, and I've tasted some of them, those are really good, you know, and interesting that we are moving forward. Now, one question that begs an answer is whether our government is looking at the private sector, like Farm Fresh, the example of Farm Fresh and Sekinchan Paddy, to actually move the agri sector forward. Is it the job of the private sector or is it the job of the government? And with our self-sufficiency with chicken, eggs, and pigs, I must say that with ASF, African swine fever, decimating our herds throughout the country, we're going to slip there as well. So let us move forward. And of course, I would like to also draw attention to JJ's highlights and the solutions, the little light at the end of the tunnel that we've seen in this segment of the presentations, and how we can gain value from waste as well. So without saying too much more, for those of you who weren't here earlier, there is that little red button in front of you. And if you want to ask a question, just press on that red button. It'll turn green and you can ask your questions. So let's open to the floor for your questions, please. Yes, please.
Yes, good afternoon to a distinguished panel. My name is Joseph.
Yes, and where are you from, Joseph? Can you please state your name and your where you're from, yeah?
I'm Malaysian and I work for a company called Joseph & Company. It's an accounting firm. Okay, right. With regard to this trade marginalization, at a post-COVID era, trade restrictions at a post-COVID era, just say in Malaysia for that matter, there was a restriction on the export of chicken and eggs, I think, I think to Singapore. And Singapore had to depend on Brazil or whatsoever. I think all this done on purpose. See, I think the egg farmers were doing it, just to hike up the price. So Indonesia was also doing restrictions with regard to export of palm oils. So all those just created within the exporting country. See, so what is your view? Is it different from what I'm saying, or do you concur with what I'm saying? Thank you.
Professor, would you like to?
Yeah, I think each situation probably requires more in-depth study and understanding to realize what was happening behind the scenes. These kinds of short-term, from a principle perspective and from a practice perspective, these kind of short-term export restrictions usually doesn't work in the long term, because like the Singapore example that I showed just now, they quickly diversify into other sources, and the people that end up losing are actually our own producers. But I think for that particular case, what was happening, from what I understand, was that the control prices were not being increased, and the input prices in terms of feeds, animal feed was increasing because of the Ukraine war and the currency changes in Malaysia. So the farmers were saying, you either increase, the producers were telling the government, you either increase the ceiling price for chicken and eggs, or you subsidize us. Government said, okay, yeah, because of elections coming up, we are going to subsidize you. But the payment process was so onerous that at one particular point in time, when it was at breaking point, I suspect that some of the producers actually say, look, we're not gonna sell the same kind of volume to the domestic market as a way of showing their displeasure with the government. And then the government responded by saying, okay, since you don't want to sell to the domestic market, we stop you from exporting. And then suddenly it becomes a very destructive kind of relationship. So what actually is probably not indicated in some of these trade barrier measures is some of these kinds of trust issues, long-term planning with regards to domestic production and exports, and also the ability to adjust prices, the market mechanisms. All this come into the into the picture in Malaysia, and I suspect in many other countries as well. So long and short of it, don't shoot yourself in the foot.
Philip, would you have any?
I think one of the important aspects of this, Dr. Ong, you had a slide on the food security, and Singapore was at the top as being the most safe. I think that's a lesson for a lot of the countries in the region. They really have really low trade barriers. If one of their suppliers wants to stop exports, they would import from Indonesia or anywhere else. And I think that's the example of how, with little intervention from the government, allowing the market, they can pick different suppliers. And if there's a shock from another government, if there's a bird flu, or if there's a fungus rotting palm trees, you have more than 100 other countries that are other potential suppliers. That's all.
Hi, Benedict Wirasena from Bait Al Amana. I take interest in Prof. Fatima, your point on that local input development to reduce costs. But my question is, do we have the comparative advantage, or which sectors do we have the comparative advantage to develop those inputs? If not, should we diversify our inputs instead, following like Singapore's example in diversifying their import of food? Yeah, but for us, it will be inputs then. What's your perspective on that? Thank you.
Do we have the comparative advantage? Of course we have. Right? We have so much biomass. Our food waste every day, the estimates are from 8,000 to 30,000 per day, and we have just let them go and not utilizing it, And number two, comparative advantage can be created, right? Holland shows it, Israel shows it, Vietnam did it, China did it. It's all about improving our capacity in terms of utilizing our resources, doing R&D, and then consistently improving our what do you call it, our yield, as well as, of course, coming up with local fertilizer. I don't expect, as I said earlier, there's no way you can compete giants like Bayer's or Monsanto or whatever, but at least the moment you develop local input sector, not only you produce input sector, but traders, right? So the market is there, and then you can attract young people, you can attract entrepreneurs and so on. So the whole industry will be flourishing. So the multiplier effect is much more than just fertilizer. I believe in that.
I think you're right there, because we do have agencies that actually look into R&D. And that's what's going to propel us forward. Take, for example, what's happening in the Philippines now. Corn is one of the key products that you need for livestock feed. So they have done research to edit the genes of, not GMO, edit the genes of corn, local corn, to be able to produce, to actually increase the yield from corn. So are we doing anything in that area?
As for corn, for the moment we import corn and grow it locally. I mean, it is a good start, right? But as you mentioned, we must come up with our own corn. And also we are utilizing a palm kernel cake for, livestock feedstuff. And I remember reading somewhere in Taiwan, they have this zero food waste policy, and they turn the food waste to also fertilizer and either other bio-based products. And Bangkok, zero food waste policy, where they turn all the food waste into fertilizer. So, of course, this modern fertilizer, they are very powerful, but at least, right, we utilize our local material, we reduce costs, we develop the local input market or industry, but most of all, of course, this is slow, right? Slow for the soil to recover, but I think there is a slow movement, yeah, guys? In France, slow movement. It's called slow movement. There's no need to, slow food. There's no need to go to hurry, But because nature takes time to replenish itself, so organic fertilizer, even though not as powerful as a chemical fertilizer, but it is sustainable and very friendly to earth.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, I'm going to pose a question to Phil.
Hi. Camera is blocking us. As you mentioned just now, in general, it looks like what I call a dismal situation, as the word you used just now, as a whole in terms of food security, but in particular for Malaysia. But do you think with the current situation we'll be able, we have the opportunity to develop food at the level of, like, when you think of salmon, it's Scottish salmon. When you think of beef, it's Wagyu beef, I'm talking about that kind of level of food. It was already there, probably there are already some seeds there, as Prof. Ong Kian-Ming shared just now, the brand Langit and Fresh Farms, probably they are heading that way. But what's your takes on the panel? Do you see this with the kind of situation now? Do you see that kind of development in the food industry in Malaysia as a whole?
You're looking at premium, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Actually, I'm not so pessimistic about the food situation in Malaysia, in the sense that our food security score is still relatively okay. But I do agree with Professor Fatima that we are underachieving our potential, way underachieving. And the reason why I brought up those examples in terms of higher value products and also niche products is that this is a way in which we can excite the market, so to speak. Excite the market in terms of bringing in not just young people, but also potential investors, whether it's local or abroad, potential new entrepreneurs, and also people who are willing to bring in new ways of doing food tech, for example, and agri-tech, right? So, the kind of private equity money that's been flowing into the region, is an indication that they are looking for opportunities. And I think if, let's say, we can grow this ecosystem and break the image that agriculture is only something that is very boring for old people, not very innovative or exciting from a technology perspective, not much marketing involved, so we can try to change the script, and then suddenly it becomes much more sexy, so to speak, and I'm glad that there's examples, such as Big Dutchman that have been operating in Malaysia with success. There are also other examples, bigger companies in Malaysia that have grown significantly, QL Resources, for example, they've grown into $1 billion company, and also very sustainable. I visited some of their chicken producing areas in Pajam, in Negeri Sembilan, and they've been harvesting biogas for a long time already. Way before other people started to do it, they already did it before this ESG kind of a trend. And they did it because not just because of sustainability, but because of long-term investment and profitability. They could use the gas to actually burn it and generate electricity to pump in cooler air to cool down the chickens, which will then lead them to produce better eggs and increase profitability in the long term. So I think these are good examples that we need to highlight and perhaps use that as inspiration for other people in the agri-tech sector. Yeah.
I'm sorry for the dismal picture, but data speaks, correct? So those data are not mine, but those data are published. So I just show you what it means. Okay, talking about agriculture, as mentioned by, sorry I call you YB, but you were once YB. Agriculture, you guys are wrong, Tell me, is Starbucks not agriculture? KFC not agriculture? They are agriculture, they are food, right? Just because you're so fashionable, so you don't think it's agriculture. This is where the future lies. Meaning, I have trust in the youngs, and I have big trust in modern technology. I mentioned just now, I've Googled agriculture startups in Indonesia, and I was surprised, even the small farmers, small fishers are able to export their fish through online platform, initiated by young people. Check tonight, Aruna is one online platform for e-business. It is listed in Forbes. They're just young girls, 3 young girls, So I think you need to enhance this entrepreneurship, enhance creativity, give them much support, give them grants, and they will excel. And that is lacking now. I believe in startups, and before grab the opportunity, let us ask our young to go ahead with this, digitalizing the industry. With regards to, what was it just now? What was the question just now? Sorry.
You mean on premiumization?
Yeah, yes. Actually, there are spots of successes, but not enough to drive the industry. I'll give you one example. There is a young guy in Penang. He grows vanilla and using a very modern technique, vanilla flavor. And vanilla flavor is so expensive, right? Yes, but he was able to. So we need that kind of ideas, very far forward ideas. And I know there's a young girl in Bangsa. She sells SOR, single origin cocoa, SOC, single origin cocoa planted in a highly natural environment. Cocoa is a understory commodity, right? But guys, I felt sad that we have lost cocoa. Cocoa, my goodness, the demand is ever increasing. The moment consumers are getting rich, they will give cocoa to their wives or girlfriends, and they are very, very expensive. This much is about 80 ringgit. And I must tell you this, I've done a big study on cocoa, and we discover that if the farmers do on cooperative basis, say about 25 of them, 25 to 50, and I've discovered machines from Germany, conching, processing, and it can be done in shop lots. After 5 years, they can earn 1 million because cocoa beans is very cheap, but one block of cocoa this size is about 80 ringgit. And the housewife can use it for cakes or biscuits, whatever. We couldn't believe our eyes, but we recalculated and calculated, yes, by the 5th year, they're able to earn millions. No wonder the chocolates in Europe are so expensive. Those chocolates, the expensive chocolates, are not produced by big companies, but artisanal, in European countries. So we lost it. We have lost coffee. Look, how much a glass of coffee, Starbucks, is almost 20 ringgit. And we have our coffee, we ignore it. That's why I'm making noise here. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to say that we need to wake up this side of the room, so please go ahead.
Maybe I can add something to the remarks as well. That be reminded that companies like QL that were just mentioned, or Leon Hub, they are expanding in Vietnam and Indonesia. They're building large livestock facilities as well. Next to that, you have companies like Tyson coming in, joint venture with Ding Dings, building processing facilities here for halal products as a hub to the Middle East. So this technology is developing and it's coming in, you know, but not on all the aspects.
Prof, what the main reason our cocoa industry decay in Malaysia especially?
All right. Going back to archetypes, yeah, well, we call it boom and bust. Brazil had it. Brazil had it in the 60s. It was a boom and then bust. The reason, there are many reasons. Number one is the cocoa pot borer, and the cocoa pot was not able to address it, right? And number two, the prices were down, and about half of the half of the cocoa plantations were estates. So the moment, and you know estate, they are capital driven, right? The moment the prices are down, they just pack their bags and leave the.
How about the disease that I've been told that the disease
cocoa
is
pot borer?
Yeah.
Yes, that was the mistake. We were not able to address it.
Yeah.
And
why we cannot address it?
Cocoa is highly sensitive commodities. What happened was when they opened up the area for cocoa and they plant, I think, some kelapa, coconut, or some other trees because they must have shadow, right? In this case, during that opening up of the area, so it was open, right? So the insects have nowhere to go but to the cocoa tree. So they were not able to understand the ecosystem or the environmental requirement of cocoa.
With the technology that world has right now, right?
Yes.
Is, you know.
That's my hope. Let's revive cocoa industry. It has the demand is always there.
Yes.
All right.
Cocoa and also coffee. Yes.
Let's revive coffee. I'm sure we have all sorts of coffee, but we have just forgotten about it, and would rather pay 20 ringgit for that miserable coffee at Starbucks.
Okay, just give me a minute. Let's answer the question. Hear from you first.
Yeah, I'm Anggana from Indonesia, from Masindo. Perhaps I will I try to elaborate my question. Perhaps Ms. Connie can help if it's something not clear, or you can reconfirm. Because I triggered with the title is the true food security is very noble goals for the global. But we also faces with the continuous risk, not just about the country by country, but also the region, even the global. We recall from the Ukraine and also Russia, the war between the countries, and we have the problem with the gandum, I forgot gandum with the wheat problem. And then when we have problem in Brazil for the beef, it's a global crisis. So what do you think about how to mitigate and reduce the risk from the food security itself? Because if we talk about if we're very local centric, we can secure some of the commodities, but perhaps we have to relate to each other. From the ASEAN, it's a global, it's like the supply chains that can be split one by one, because actually in a long term, the risk is very real about the policy itself. If we discuss about trade barrier, I think the sense of the global now become the protectionism. They try to protect their own market. They want to protect their own countries. So it's a mixed problem from the natural aspect, from the policy aspect, from the geopolitical aspect now. So how the panelists see how do we mitigate the risk and also manage the risk to become happy for all of us for the next generation to the next generation.
Can I rephrase that a little bit for Philip? Probably looking at self-sufficiency, intra-regional trade as compared to global trade in relation to the geopolitical tensions that the global trade in the framework is experiencing at the moment.
Thanks for your question. I would caution confusing self-sufficiency with security, which I think is at the base of your question. Just as a side story, the United States, the last 2 years, we had a shortage of infant formula. And we had self-sufficiency in infant formula. We had 5 main manufacturers that supplied 98% of the market in the United States. But then in one of those plants, which made 25% of the product, there was health concerns. and then they had to shut down, and then there was massive shortages in the country. But there was no easy way to import infant formula from other countries because of decades of trade barriers that built up. First, the president waited, and that didn't help. And then the president issued a Defense Production Act, and that didn't help. And then finally, they opened up the borders so we could import formula from Europe and around the world, which was safe for everybody else in the world, but not for the United States, because we had these trade barriers that were there to protect us, but they're really just there to protect those 5 manufacturers. I think when we talk about food security and regional food security, we see more climate actions, especially in places like Malaysia, where you could have a hurricane, could wipe out a whole crop of bananas or other tropical fruits. I think part of the domestic production should be seen as part of regional security too, because if you don't have those open borders, it's going to be hard to replace your domestic supply in case there is some other kind of shock, like we've seen recently with bird flu or with Ukraine wheat shortages, and etc. So, thank you.
Okay, we have time for just one more question.
Yeah, thank you so much for your insightful presentation. My name is Kian-Ming. I'm a research associate at ESB. I'm also part of University of Malaya Sustainability Science program. I have one question. Because European Union recently banned Malaysian palm oil for sustainability reasons. And I spoke with the ambassador of Spain to Malaysia. He says that there are some misunderstanding of European Union to Malaysia. So what's your thought of that? Because he isn't that it's against the free trade on agriculture. Thank you so much.
I encountered this issue when I was deputy minister at MITI. I think there's a big misconception in Malaysia that somehow EU has banned Malaysian palm oil. That's not true. We still export a lot of palm oil to the EU, probably our 3rd largest export market. But what the EU has done is to put in certain policies to, for example, phase out subsidies for biofuels of certain sorts, which includes palm oil. So once you phase out those subsidies for palm oil, then palm oil the demand for palm oil will naturally fall. So it's not a banning of palm oil per se. And also lately, the EU has come out with the EU deforestation regulation, whereby they say that new tracts of plantations that are developed after 2020 on deforested land will come under scrutiny from the EU. And that provoked quite a big reaction on the part of Malaysia. But if, let's say, Malaysia feels that our own forest protection record is robust, and that we're not producing in new deforested areas, but let's say producing or replanting in existing areas, then there's no worry about Malaysian palm oil being affected by these new regulations. And I think this is where there needs to be proper policy understanding and coordination between the relevant stakeholders, whether it's the Malaysian government, the EU, relevant EU agencies that come out with these policies, and then to communicate these policies to the larger public in Malaysia, so that those kinds of mistaken impressions don't take root. Yeah, but I would also say that because of many decades of sort of like anti-palm oil marketing in the EU, palm oil's impression among the larger marketplace in the EU in terms of consumer sentiment is actually quite bad. But again, that's not necessarily something to do with EU policy. It would be something to do with certain NGOs, certain groups using pictures of orangutans in deforested places looking emaciated and saying that this is a result of palm oil plantation policies in Malaysia. So we need to be able to respond to that in a different kind of way.
Okay, we've come to the end of our questions. we've come to the end of our questions, and I'm so sorry for those whom we were not able to answer, but please feel free to meet up with the panelists after this to have your questions addressed. Thank you once again for your attention, and to CME for this session.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And that concludes our second session on technical progress and free trade in agriculture. Next, we also have Dr. Arifin Fee from Advanced Center for Addiction Treatment Advocacy. Dr. Arifin is a general practitioner and addiction therapy specialist with 25 years of experience. He advocates for tobacco harm reduction policies and serves as the president of Advanced Center for Addiction Treatment Advocacy. He has appeared in multiple media events, written opinion pieces on the topic multiple times. He's also very active in community service and hold positions in various organizations. Dr. Arifin's special interest is in addiction, community health, and community health. The third speaker we have, who will be presenting on the 3 Ws, is Samsul K. Arifin, the president of MOVE, which is Malaysia Organization of Vape Entity. MOVE is also is an organization advocating for the rights of vaping community in Malaysia. He is also the program director of Harm Awareness Association, which raises public awareness in harm reduction. Aside from that, he's also a member of Coalition of Asia Pacific Tobacco Harm Reduction Advocates, a regional group that promotes tobacco harm reduction policies. Last but not least, we have Dr. Walter de Wit from EY Global Trade and Direct Tax Partner in Netherlands, who'll be speaking on how differential taxation can support harm reduction and stimulate innovation. So Dr. Walter is an international customs and indirect tax expert with over 3 decades of experience. He advises clients in various sectors and has also served as Advocate General in the Supreme Court of Netherlands, providing legal opinions on customs, value-added tax, and excise cases. After all 4 presentations, we will once again move into a panel discussion moderated by none other Dr. Carmelo Ferlito. And without further ado, I would like to invite our first presenter, Benedict Wirasina. A round of applause.
All right, thank you to our MC, Selini, who's a good friend of mine. Very good afternoon to every single one of you. Thank you, Dr. Carmelo, and also CME for having me. I'm privileged to speak today as probably one of the youngest speakers of the entire day. But it's exciting to talk about a topic that is very close to my heart on harm reduction. I've been working on this research for about 3 to 4 years now. Been privileged to work with different organizations, including Malaysian Society for Harm Reduction, to advocate and to learn more about how can we improve tobacco policy in our country. So what I'll do today is I'll talk a bit more. I'll set the background, the foundation on harm reduction first in my first few slides. And then after that, I'll focus on the economics of harm reduction, giving examples geared towards tobacco harm reduction, especially more examples in Malaysia, considering that we have a tobacco bill that's going to be tabled probably the next few weeks in May. And finally, I will share a bit of policy recommendations. Now, harm reduction in daily life is not something that is new, but it's quite a fairly relatively unknown concept. But we have it in our daily life. We use it. Seat belts, sunscreen, speed limits. It's basically public health strategies to lessen the negative social and physical consequences associated with various human behaviors. Some of this might be legal, some of this might be illegal. Basically, the concept is not to prevent the behavior in itself, but to prevent the harms or reduce the harms associated with certain behaviors. Very good example, like driving may cause accidents, we wear seat belts. So we prevent the harms associated with certain habits or behaviors. Now in Malaysia, harm reduction is not totally new. We have a drug harm reduction policy instituted in 2005, and this has been fairly successful ever since then. Give you an example, Dr. Adiba Kamaruzzaman, a leading figure in terms of drug harm reduction, has issued an article stating that 87%, that they managed to reduce the number of HIV users by HIV cases by 87% from 2013 up to 2023, which resulted in a savings of about 209.5 million for the government of Malaysia. Now, this shows that drug harm reduction has been successful. What is new then is tobacco harm reduction, which we do not have in Malaysia. Now, just a bit of principles just to introduce all of you to the concept of harm reduction. As I said earlier, it focuses on the prevention of harm, not the prevention of the behavior in itself. Second, it's a use of evidence-based policy, scientific research, and practice, which is what we're talking about today, innovation. It requires and depends largely on innovation for new devices, new techniques, new approaches. Third, it is pro-choice, it's a commitment to universal human rights. What does that mean? It means that it's empowering the individual to make their choice as the primary agent of change. It is ensuring that the state does not become a nanny state or a paternalistic behavior in deciding for the people what is best for them. Finally, it's accepting behavioral change as an incremental process. It's not about waking up tomorrow and I quit smoking totally, I'm fine. No, it's about a gradual process of change, and this takes time. I'm going to talk a bit about the economic principles behind harm reduction and compare it a bit to the current approaches to tobacco control, such as banning, such as restrictions, taxation, and so on and so forth. First of all, cost-benefit analysis. Now, it's important to understand why do individuals engage in certain behaviors, though it might seem harmful for them. You know, human beings are rational. We call it homo economicus, right? In terms of economics. Human beings are rational actors. They think about the perceived benefits and perceived costs. For example, in smoking. Now, I'm not encouraging all of us to take up smoking, no, don't get me wrong. But basically what I'm trying to do is to reason why some people might choose to smoke even though they know that it might be harmful for their health. First of all, they probably believe that it's a stress relief for them. It's a psychosocial factor. It could be for socializing factors in the work environment, in peer groups, for example. There's an environmental factor. And finally, I think what's the most important that we often neglect is that some people actually smoke to just stay awake, to stimulate dopamine in their systems, especially when it comes to repetitive and monotonous jobs. And this often occurs in the groups of B40 groups who have to moonlight or work multiple jobs. I mean, some of us who have ridden a bus from KL to Penang or anywhere else would know that most bus drivers, lorry drivers, they often smoke on the journey to just keep awake, for that matter. So who then is the government to restrict or ban or come to interfere and imply that individuals are unable to access the risk for themselves? Shouldn't the individual be empowered to make the decision for themselves? It's better than to provide choices with less harmful alternatives. Allow the individual to do their own cost-benefit analysis for themselves. Next, I want to highlight a quote from, I think this is something very close to my heart, and especially Dr. Carmelo, from Ludwig von Mises, from the Austrian School of Economics. Now, I'm just going to read the whole quote because it's really interesting. Opium and morphine are certainly dangerous, habit-forming drugs. Once the principle is admitted that it's the duty of the government to protect the individual against his own foolishness, no serious objections can be advanced against further encroachment. A good case could be made out in favor of the prohibition of alcohol and nicotine. Now, where do we draw the line, yeah? And why limit the government's benevolent providence to the protection of the individual's body? Why not also the mind and the soul? Why not prevent him from reading bad books, seeing bad plays, looking at bad paintings, statues, hearing bad music? Nicki Minaj. No, I'm just kidding. No, ladies and gentlemen, you see, the mischief done by bad ideologies, surely, is much more pernicious, both for the individual and for the whole society, than that done by narcotic drugs. Now, what this highlights is that where do we then draw the line? Should the government decide what is right and what is wrong for the people? Are individuals unable to make their own decisions? Now, this is an important point to ponder. Moving on to the concept of taxation. Sorry, I'm going really fast because of the time limit, but I'll try to cover as much as I can. Now, on taxation, we know that sin tax is often regressive. Why? The tax burden has the greatest impact on households with the least income. As you see in this graph over here, the lower the income, they often bear the higher percentage of their income share goes to pay the taxation on harmful activities. And that's why taxation here violates vertical equity. Not only that, tobacco consumption is relatively inelastic. And studies have shown that the price elasticity is about -0.3 to -0.5. What does that mean? It means that a 10% increase in price would often only lead to a 3 to 5% decrease in consumption. Which means if the government hikes up taxes more and more, not necessarily the consumption will fall as much. And what will happen is the households from the least income will bear the greatest burden of this. Now, is that fair? Ladies and gentlemen, moving on to the next point about unintended consequences, something that we need to understand when it comes to policy making. There needs to be a trade-off analysis which includes the unintended consequences. And in Malaysia, we have seen that a hike in excise duties has led to a rise in the incidence of illicit cigarettes. In 2020, it reached the peak of 63.8% as of March 2023. The latest one is about 57 as a result of enforcement activities done by the government. However, it is still really high. And the latest data, this is the whole entire Malaysia. I didn't put this graph because it's really shocking. In Sabah and Sarawak, East Malaysia, only 1 in 5 cigarettes are legal. 81% are illegal. And this is latest of 2023 based on Nelson's study on illicit cigarettes. Now, this is really worrying. What kind of policies will create more and more unintended consequences like this? And how these illicit cigarettes will result in more harmful impacts on individuals? Now, I'm going to just share a bit of policy recommendations before I end, but I think the other speakers will also share more in-depth in some of these policy recommendations. Now, the principle that I would propose from my research is that, first of all, if you smoke, stop. That is cessation. If you don't smoke, don't start. That is prevention. If you can't stop, make the switch to a less harmful alternative. That is harm reduction. In this three-pronged approach, the third approach is missing in the Malaysian context. We have very much the first two approaches, cessation programs. We have prevention efforts, although it's questionable whether they are effective or not. But the final approach, which is harm reduction, is missing in our country. For those who are unable to stop for whatever reason, for example, as I said earlier, the monotonous repetitive jobs, or they just need to stay awake for that matter using dopamine, it's their own choice. Can we help them switch to a less harmful alternative? Unfortunately, this option is missing in the current scenario in the Malaysian context. Now, we see in other countries that the pragmatic approach, which incorporates harm reduction, results in a greater reduction of tobacco prevalence. Give you an example, in the UK, in New Zealand, which endorses vaping as a way to stop smoking. It's a less harmful alternative to stop smoking, coupled with smoking cessation services, of course. In Japan, there are less stringent regulations on heated tobacco products. For example, there are certain areas where you can use heated tobacco products where you are not allowed to use cigarettes, combustible cigarettes. Now, these kind of policies have helped them reduce the smoking prevalence much more than Malaysia, which we recorded a slight decrease, but unfortunately, it still remains quite high, where 1 in 5 Malaysians still smoke combustible cigarettes. What other policies can be done? First of all, a differentiated approach according to the risk continuum. What does that mean? It means that we should not clump all these devices, vaping, e-cigarette, heated tobacco products, nicotine replacement therapy, snus, all under the same category as combustible cigarettes when they reflect a different risk level. We should avoid a one-size-fits-all. Our previous health minister did say that it's all together the same. We're going to just deal with it all through the same approach under the Control of Tobacco Products and Smoking Bill 2022. But now, is that a wise move when they are actually different risks? For example, Public Health England in 2015 explained that vaping is 95% less harmful. And why is that? It's because it still delivers nicotine, especially the vape products with nicotine. It delivers the nicotine without the carcinogens that are present in combustible cigarettes. So what should be done instead is less stringent regulations on less harmful non-combustible alternatives. This will incentivize or nudge those who want to stop smoking towards stopping. Next, risk proportionate taxation is another way to nudge behavioral change. You know, as we know, financial incentives are important, as Dr. Carmelo pointed out this morning. We are always looking forward to financial incentives, right? This is one way to do it, and I won't go deeper into this because I know Dr. David, I think, is sharing more about this part in his presentation. So taxation should reflect the risk of harm. That's the basic concept of risk proportionate taxation. Moving on. A final thing that I want to dwell a bit longer on. Since we're talking about innovation, we certainly need favorable policies to boost innovation. Looking at the chart on the right, all these different inventions are market-based, and they did not exist if companies did not choose to innovate, did not find solutions. How do we deliver nicotine in a safer manner, in a less harmful manner, to promote greater public health? Now, all this is through favorable policies, and that's why this is important. Instead of a complete ban, which is not successful, which may increase the prevalence of illicit cigarettes, why not incentivize experimentation? Why not a favorable tax regime for greater R&D? We've been talking a lot about R&D today, and you know, it's sad that in Malaysia, only 1% of GDP is used for R&D. That's really, really low. Why not proper institutional environment? And that we talked about that in the first session today. Why not proper institutional environment for innovation to flourish when it comes to this? Who knows, one day we might be able to have a system where people can get dopamine without any form of risk at all, any harm. Innovators can dream big, and I think that's the way we are able to solve challenges of daily life. Now, finally, to end, harm reduction is about compassion, dignity, love. Let us remember that it focuses on positive change. It's about collaboration, compassion, empowerment, acceptance, and respect. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ben. Can we all agree that's a very fun presentation to listen to? Ben's such a good speaker. Can we get another round of applause for him? For the next presentation, I would like to invite Dr. Arifin, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank, first of all, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to this evening session of CME Summit. And in this session, I would like to discuss about nicotine vaping products, NVP, and its two regulatory model, that is the prescription model, and number two is the regulated consumer product model. As we know that nicotine is the most used addictive in the world, and the most common way for people to get nicotine is by tobacco smoking. But unfortunately, smoking is a very harmful practice for our health. It poses a very, very heavy burden for economy and for health. And this is an image taken in around 1865, which describe the best, give the best description of the harm of tobacco smoking. And in fact, tobacco smoking is the most preventable cause of premature death and various diseases. And we should know that nicotine itself is a relatively benign substance, and it does not cause any serious harm to health. It does not cause cancer, it does not cause severe lung diseases or whatever. And for tobacco smoking, most of the harms come from the burning of tobacco, which produces some 7,000 chemicals, of which about 250 chemicals are very, very harmful to health, of which 70 of the chemicals are cancer-causing agents. So then it comes, this is why I said that nicotine is not really harmful for health. And vape, NVP, or popularly known as vape or e-cigarette, is an innovation that attempts to deliver nicotine without burning of tobacco. And it heats up nicotine-containing fluid, produce vapor or aerosol, and then inhale, and then deliver nicotine without most of the dangerous chemical found in tobacco smoke. Tobacco smoke. So this is another vape device, and this graphical illustration, it shows that the harm caused by nicotine vape is almost as low as the WHO approved products, nicotine replacement therapy, which include patch, oral products, and nasal spray. And many notable bodies in the world, such as Public Health England, acknowledge that vaping is very much less harmful in comparison to combustible cigarette. And we have to know that vaping is mainly used as an alternative to the combustible cigarette. And among smokers, it is one of the popular, even the most popular quitting aid. It is used for quitting aid. And in last year, in 2022, a report done by a Cochrane Library Review, it is mentioned that they found evidence with high certainty that vaping is more effective in quit smoking method compared to other quit smoking method. And therefore, in tobacco harm reduction, vaping is very popular and very used as a substitute to smoking, and also as a quit smoking aid. But the problem is, even though vaping is much less harmful than combustible cigarette, it is not 100% harmless. And because it is comparatively new, about 20 years in the market, the long-term effect of vaping is not yet fully known. So that's why we need, due to this potential harm and potential benefit of vaping, we need a comprehensive and an effective regulatory model that focus on, number one, preventing the uptake of unintended population, such as the young people and never smokers. And we should focus on facilitating the smokers to quit smoking by switching to this less harmful product, which is vaping. And two models has been extensively debated. That is number one, like my topic is that number one is the prescription model, which pose a total restriction of vape, and another one is the strictly regulated consumer model, which seems to be less effective. So what is prescription model? So prescription model is a model whereby vape is only accessible through prescription by the registered and approved medical practitioner with medical advice and medical monitoring. And vape is only available in the approved and registered pharmacies. So what is the advantage of this model? This advantage of this model is that vape will be made exclusively used by smokers. And there will be a total cut-off of access to vape by the unintended population, such as the young people and the never smokers. So, but this model, this prohibitive model, looks like a prohibition type model. The disadvantage is that it will make vape less available, less accessible, and less affordable, which are three factors that will make vape more attractive. So the good thing about this model is that it will prevent the unintended population, such as young people and never smokers, to have access to vape. But the bad consequence is that it will be less attractive to smokers, and it will make vape, it does not serve the purpose of vape as a quit smoking aid. So then, about the consumer model. So consumer model is where vape is accessible without prescription. So everybody can get vape with or without medical advice. And it is available everywhere. That's what practice in Malaysia right now. And this model has the advantage of vape will become more available, more accessible, and more affordable. However, the downside of this model is the potential uptake by the unintended population, uptake by the young people, uptake by the never smokers. So this is the bad effect of consumer model. The predicted bad effect of consumer model. So on contrary to prescription model, this model is predicted to have a greater impact on smoking prevalence, because it will be more attractive to smokers. More smokers will take up vaping, and as studied by the Cochrane review I said just now, so it's a better method for quit smoking. So what have been achieved so far with this model? So prescription model is only Australia is the only country in the world that implemented this prescription model, and it is enforced since October 2021, and after 12 months, it is reported by the Health Authority of Australia that this effort did not achieve its target after 12 months. And also an independent review reported that this regulation has failed to achieve their aims, and instead they have had the opposite effect, such as the poor acceptance by the smokers, poor compliance by the smokers, the thriving black market, the increased number of young people vaping, and also the poor engagement by the prescribers and by the pharmacies. Okay. So in response to this review, last week, the Health Minister of Australia, Mark Butler, has announced announced and proposed a new law which is more stricter than now, but the result is yet to be seen. And for the consumer product model of NVP, for the rest of the world, that is Australia, but for the rest of the world, the consumer product model of NVP is adopted everywhere, the rest of the world. And the UK and New Zealand are the pioneers in promoting vape as the smoking cessation tool in the regulated consumer product model. And so far, the results are very encouraging. We can see that the decline in smoking prevalence seems to be accelerated in countries that in UK and New Zealand, unlike the more plateaued decline in Australia. But as predicted, there will be the rise in incidence of youth vaping in those countries. But according to the report by ASH UK and also the Health Authority in New Zealand, the percentage of the established vapers among young people and never smokers is very small and almost negligible. And in fact, the prevalence of the prevalence is declining in those countries. So to conclude, I would say that this prohibition type prescription model for NVP is a very popular concept among the tobacco control activists. However, the effectiveness and the viability of this approach is questionable, since history has repeatedly told us that prohibition is causing more harms than good. And the recent Australian experience is the example, even though it's just 1 year, but you can see that this prohibition type model is failed. So on the other hand, the strictly and sensibly regulated consumer model for NVP has shown a promising result in the UK and New Zealand to tackle the smoking problem. And I believe that with strict and comprehensive regulation, the regulated consumer product model will be very effective in bringing down the prevalence and will put us on the right track towards smoke-free world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arifin. For our second last presentation, I would like to invite Samsul K. Arifin. Can we get a round of applause for him?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Samsul. I am the president of a non-profit organization that represents vape consumer in Malaysia. And the sole purpose of us incorporating the non-profit move is for us to engage with the government, the stakeholders, the policymakers, to get vape to be regulated. I've been doing this for 12 years now, right? And my sharing is not going to be about statistics or numbers. I'm going to share with you real-world issues that we face on the ground, right? And hence, the name of the topic that I'm going to share today is moving the needle. Moving the needle here basically means our engagement with the policymakers in regards to the legislative needle that we moved from the point where we started off many years ago, from where it was banned to where it is right now. And we first started when I was summoned. There I am there, right there, with the then Minister of Health. And he told me that, Sam, sorry to say, we have to ban vape, right? So it was in the news. So it was going to be a complete blanket ban on vape. You know, you can vape You can sell it, you can have it with you. So here, coming back to the topic of moving the needle, we started off with the needle being on the extreme right of the speedometer, right? Total blanket ban. And if you were to look at the speedometer, you can see that on the other end of the spectrum is overregulation, and at the middle of the spectrum is consumer-friendly regulations framework. I think this has been touched by the previous speaker, friend of mine, Dr. Arifin. And I started off when I incorporated MOVE, where we are at, where it was announced that it's going to be a blanket ban. Now, the role we play here as advocates is somewhat a tricky one. We need to find a balance. We want it to be regulated. Yes, this was the main objective. But if you were to push it too hard, then you jump over to the over-regulation, and that's not what we want. So we always have to play a balancing game, where the regulation model needs to be just right in order for it to be effective. So this is where we started off. And the moment when Dr. Subramaniam, then the Minister of Health, announced that they're going to ban vape, come all the news from the mass media, with all this information, fear-mongering tactics, fake news, right? On the mass media, I can recall, one of the news that I can recall right now was from the Young Doctors Association of Malaysia. The article reads, vape causes erectile dysfunction, right? I'm a vapor. I've been vaping for 10 years, and I'm married, right? So feel free to call my wife, and I can tell you, she can attest that I do not suffer from erectile dysfunction. But okay, that's fine. That's just one person, right? So is there a test on this? Unfortunately, Ministry of Health has never conducted any tests on the safety aspect or the harmful aspect of vape. Now, looking at this misinformation, fear-mongering tactics, we made the decision, the logical decision, as was presented by our first speaker. What should we do? Use science and data and facts to engage with the policymakers. Am I right? That's what you should do, right? So what we did was, we went to see the Minister of Health, we went to MOH, Minister of Health, and we presented the first thing that everyone quotes, right? Vape is 95% safer than smoking, because the talk at that time was that vape was much more harmful, much more detrimental to your health than smoking. So we presented this, right, from the PHE, Public Health of England. Now, maybe you do not know what is Public Health of England. Public Health of England is an agency with 5,000 professionals, with doctors and scientists and researchers. They are there to formulate public health for United Kingdom, right? So I think when the research concludes from PHE states that vape is 95% safer than cigarettes, I think, if this is presented, I presented this to the Minister of Health at that time. Was it taken seriously? No, right? They did not, even though it came from PHE, right? This was the news at that time. Vape is much more dangerous than cigarettes. Medias are here. These medias, they have trends. So the next wave of news was bahaya asap vape, the danger of secondhand vapor, right? Here I go again, with the data and facts that I brought into the Ministry of Health that shows to them that, let me just now quickly share with you the conclusion of this test. They did a test on 3 areas of people who smoke, a family who smokes in the house, the second house, a family who vape, and the third house is a family who do not vape and smoke. As you can see that, the red line there is the line of danger. You can see on the graph on the left side, right? Those are the households of toxicity in an enclosed area in houses for people who smokes, right? Below that, you can see the dotted lines there, right? Just below the dotted lines, you can see the black graph and the yellow graph, right? The black graph are the toxicity in an enclosed house area of people who vape, exclusively vape. And the yellow line, you can see the toxicity level of people who do not vape or smoke. Yeah, it's easily concluded that those people who vape in their house and those people who do not vape or smoke, the toxicity level in their house is basically the same. Is it accepted by the Ministry of Health? No. Then again, as I said, there are waves of news that comes into the media, misinformation, fear-mongering. The next wave of news was popcorn lung, right? Whatever that is, right? It was all over the news. Now, these people keep talking about things they don't understand, but it's fine. Here we go. We brought in research and we set an appointment to the Minister of Health, and I presented this to him. And it says there, from Cancer Research UK, there have been no confirmed cases of popcorn lung reported in use of e-cigarettes. Did I say that? No, I'm not a doctor. Cancer Research UK said that. Was it accepted by the Minister of Health? Thank you. Right? So the next wave of news was, rokok elektronik menjadi punca penyebab kanser. Vape causes cancer. This was the next wave of news. Here we go again by subscribing to the logical thinking of let's present facts and science to the policymakers. Correct? That seems the right thing to do, right? So that's what I did. I brought this research again from the Cancer Research UK. Does vaping have side effects? Does it cause cancer? Let's just go to the conclusion. I did not say this. UK Cancer Research Centre concluded that there is no good evidence that vaping causes cancer. Did the MOH accepted it? No. Ooh, big one. Right? Came out all over the news. Underage vaping. Now, I understand, right? There are social implications when it comes to vape, right? But please understand, vape are only those for who wants to quit smoking. We are not saying that it's trendy. It is not for kids. Hence, why we established MOVE since 2015 to get it regulated. We do not want kids to vape. We do not want that, right? There is no such regulation right now that says that you cannot open up a vape shop close to a school. Is there such a regulation? No. Why? Because they have not regulated vape, right? So this was a big news. But then I presented the research that we got from UK that says that underage vaping is on the decline. It is not on the rise, but this research is from the UK. Is there a research that can show that vaping for underage is on the decline in Malaysia? Unfortunately, no, because Ministry of Health did not conduct any research, right? So did that accepted? I took this research, went to the MOH. Did they accepted it? No. All right. Now, this was recent. I'm sure maybe you have come across this in the news. EVALI, right? Vape-related lung injuries. Any of you have heard this in the news? This was big, right? So it was all over the news. If you vape, you're going to die. You know, there's these frightening pictures in the newspaper that they have to like make a hole in your lung. Any of you have seen that in the newspaper, right? So again, fear-mongering. Now, I can assure you, Professor Sharifah here can assure you, she's a professor here in Malaysia, that there is not even one case of EVALI in Malaysia. Not even one. Now, let me now reiterate again what EVALI is, okay? EVALI is vape-related lung injuries, okay? Which means you have a lung injury that is related to vape. But if you were to add additive in the liquid of the vape, it's no longer considered as EVALI, right? If you were to add THC into the liquid, you can say that it's EVALI, right? That's no longer vape liquid. So now, they have already concluded in US, in Europe, hello, you know, those lung injuries are not related to vape, you know, because they put additives in the liquid. So I presented it to the MOH. Did it work? No. You can see the pattern where I'm going with this? Right. So then, I had to engage the policymakers from both sides of the aisle, right? The people who walks in the corridors of power, right? And tell them and presented them, you know, with the ex-prime minister, with the current deputy minister, and, you know, I believe that I have to engage on the people on the other side of the aisle. You know, it has to be a bipartisan approach. So that's what we did. Hana Yo, Ismail Sabri, Bosku, you know lah, right? Okay, I don't have to go through it, okay? So then also I have this concern that this perception that's been shaped in media is not right, right? There's too much fear-mongering, misinformation. So we believe that if perception is shaped at mass media, we have to change. We cannot change the perception that has been shaped at the level of mass media on the level of social media. Meaning to say, I can't shout at social media based on the misinformation that has been shouted out on the mass media. So I have to go on astro, dialogue with the doctors. You know, there was once I can remember I was having a live debate with the president of the Malaysian Medical Association. I said, Doc, PhD says vape is 95% safer than cigarettes. He said, yeah, what can I do, Sam? You go to the parliament, everyone's smoking. That was his answer, right? On TV, live, okay? So all these efforts somewhat move the needle, right? So from the point where Subramaniam announced that it's going to be banned to the point that where we are recently, it was grey. Was it banned? No. Was there enforcement? Sometimes. You know, it's really grey. So we somewhat managed to move the needle a bit. Then suddenly, KJ called me. You can see there in the picture. He said, Sam, you've been fighting to regulate vape for many years now. So I can, you know, I'm going to do you a favor. We're going to regulate vape, but he gave me an ultimatum. You got to support GEG. Otherwise, if you don't support it, we're going to outright ban it, right? I mean, I can spend a whole day's session on this topic alone, but, you know, we don't have time, right? There's a whole drama behind this, all right? And he said, you got to get your friends and everyone else, and you yourself, support GEG. You guys know what GEG is, right? Generational Endgame. Those who were born after 2007 are not able to buy or purchase or use tobacco or vape products, right? But I salute KJ, right? Because at least he had the political will to do it. No other Minister of Health had the political will to do it. He had it. And, you know, so I told him, okay lah, we'll support you, all right? But then again, if I were to look at it deeper, in the end, we decided that we can't support it because it goes against the Article 8 of the Malaysian Constitution, right? It requires a judicial review, you know, of the current constitution, right? So what happened was that we thought that, you know, even though he had political will, it's over-regulated. So I called a group of friends, you know, we had a meeting after meeting in Sheraton, in Hotel Sheraton PJ, and our WhatsApp group is called Langkah Sheraton, right, to overcome this, right? And in the end, we decided that we're not going to talk to the MOH anymore. You can see the pattern there, right? So we engaged with the Ministry of Finance. When that happened, everything changed, okay? We are able to bring the regulation needle up to the point where we want it, yeah? Consumer-friendly regulation framework. We managed to speak to the powers that be for the tax from 1.20 ringgit, you know, as you said earlier on, to be risk proportionate. Now it's only 40 cents per ml, all right? So, but then again, the framework itself is really not in order yet. Yeah, the agencies are now getting their ducks in line. So I think in a few months they're going to announce a proper consumer-friendly regulations framework. I'm about to conclude here. From the very beginning when we engaged with the Ministry of Health, Malaysia has been a member of WHO, FCTC, since 2005, right? Now, in Article 1D of the FCTC defines tobacco control to include harm reduction, right? But did MOH subscribe to this? No, they did not. Right? And I'm here to tell you is that if vape is not regulated properly, right? I mean, or is not regulated, is banned, right? What do we have, right? We have products which is not tested. We have products which is not safe, right? We have an industry that cannot operate properly, and we have a government that is not able to collect tax revenues, you know, if it is banned, okay? Now, on the other hand, I think Malaysia is primed to be the #1 vape producers of the world. But somehow I think we have already missed the boat. Like they should have done this many years ago, right? But only now they're beginning to do it. But if they were to do it many years ago, now just imagine, yeah, what consists of a vape product? The device, right, which is a simple electronic device. We are a semiconductor country. We produce semiconductors. There's no problem at all for Malaysia to produce the vape device, right? Now, what consists of a vape product anyway? The liquid itself, the PG and the VG, right, which comes from palm oil. Now, we produce palm oil, so we can come up with quality products. You know, we can produce nicotine because we are an agricultural country. My point is this: we are primed to be the #1 vape producers of the world. Unfortunately, we did not take that opportunity. We did not. We missed the boat. Only now we are beginning to move the needle, and China has already jumped into the bandwagon, right? So, if we were to regulate it properly, you know, accept vape as an accepted harm reduction tool, the government potentially can collect 1 billion of tax revenue. Okay. Currently, the consumer market in Malaysia is 2.7 billion ringgit for vape products, and it is estimated for it to grow up to 23%, 23.8% in 2027. This is the potential here. Okay, but again, I think the more salient point that I want to make here is that not so much as the tax revenue or the increase of the expansion of the industry, but more on the goal that we are able to achieve smoking prevalence of 5% in 2040. Right? I've been doing this advocacy work for more than 10 years. I am suffering from what we call advocacy fatigue. Okay, right? And I am going to carry on doing it because I believe what we do here is important. What we do here is not for tax revenue or an increase of industry. I believe what we do here saves lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Now, for the last presentation, I would like to invite Dr. Walter. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my presentation will be about what we call differential taxation and how it can support harm reduction and how it stimulates innovation. And as was told in the introduction before this session, I am working as a tax consultant actually at EY. And I'm working in the global trade field, so customs duties. But that also means, for example, excise duties, which are usually levied by customs authorities. And nowadays also environmental, energy taxes and the like. And so that means that professionally I am confronted a lot with government policies which are aimed at harm reduction. And then you can, if you talk about harm reduction, not only public health, I would say, because the first 3 presentations were, of course, about public health. But you can also see it in other fields, like environmental protection, for example, is a very important policy field where differential taxation is being used. And the ultimate goal is also harm reduction. So that is an introduction. So what is a general concept of differential taxation? It's actually imposing product-specific taxes which are based on the risks that the product poses to the environment or to the public health. And there are a lot of examples. For example, sugar. We see it in Europe, for example. The UK has introduced a tax. I will tell a little bit more about it, where sugar products or sugary drinks are targeted with sugar taxes. And the higher the sugar content, the higher the tax on the product. We see it also, and there we have the environmental angle with the introduction of electric vehicles. So car taxation, is used to stimulate the introduction of electric vehicles in many countries. We see low taxes on electric vehicles, while conventional petrol cars are subject to high taxes. And that has led to a lot of success in certain countries. Alcohol, also there we see it. Low alcohol content products are taxed at a low rate, while high alcohol content products are taxed at a high rate, and often at a progressive high rate. So if you take whiskey or gin or whatever with a higher alcohol percentage in it, then the tax also progressively increases. And also in the area of smoking, it has been discussed in the other presentation, we see reduced risk smoking products which are taxed lower than traditional tobacco, than cigarettes. So what are the key elements of this concept? They circle around around the scope, around the tax base, around the period, and around a framework. And I will explain a little bit more what we mean with that. If you talk about the scope, it's okay, which products am I going to subject to the tax as a government? I identify a range of products which should be in scope and which will be subject to the taxation scheme. And so, for example, looking at soft drinks, all sweetened beverages, or sweetened beverages above a certain threshold, so above a certain sugar content, are subject to the tax, and everything that's below that is not subject to the tax. Then the tax base is based on the risk factor. So if sugary drinks, we look at the sugar content. Alcohol drinks, we look at the alcohol content. You determine, okay, what is a good target that we want to have in mind to target the harmful substance in use. The period is also important. The proper timeline for implementation. If you look at, for example, the implementation of taxes on electric cars, then governments need to take into account that it will take a certain period of time before electric cars are really introduced on a more bigger scale, so to say. And why? What do you need to keep in mind? You need to keep in mind that if you start exempting electric cars, that you may miss out revenue as a government. So maybe in a certain amount of time you need to introduce a car tax on electric cars, but at a low duty rate, and at the same time you will have progressing tariffs on conventional cars to phase them out. So that is what meant with proper timelines. So you need to think about how fast do I want to introduce a product, a less harmful product, and what will it do with my revenues, and how can I balance those two? That is very important. And then the framework, and actually that was also discussed by the other speakers. You can of course introduce a tax on a harmful product, on cigarettes or whatever, or conventional cars, but you need also to have a robust regulatory framework that accompanies the implementation of the tax. So the tax needs to be accompanied by a regulatory framework that allows the introduction. If you talk about electric vehicles, the government needs to stimulate enough charging stations, for example, otherwise it will not happen. What can also be done is ban petrol cars from city centers, for example. That will also trigger people to buy electric cars, and there are a lot of other measures from a regulatory perspective that governments can introduce to make the tax even more effective. So it's a package of things, actually. Yeah, if we look at the impact and beneficiaries, then of course, what will happen? The consumer's behavior will be impacted. It will shift, normally speaking, towards the less harmful product. But it will also, and that we have seen, for example, with sugar taxation in the UK, but also in other fields, it will drive innovation from businesses. Because what happened when the UK introduced a tax on sugary drinks, on soft drinks, the producers immediately started to look at how can we produce other products which taste just as good as our old products, but which do not attract this high tax. And they succeeded in that, actually, because in the UK we saw that the consumption of sugary drinks drastically fell. And people started to use the alternatives. And I think the third bullet point is actually self-explanatory. Of course, the goal behind all of this is to address public health and climate change issues, if you talk about the environment in the last case. So if you look at electric vehicles, and let me take one example from this slide. If we look, for example, at Norway, and actually it was in the New York Times this week, it was a whole article about it. On this slide we are talking about 54% of the new cars are electric cars in Norway. That has actually already increased towards 80% last year. So that's really a very successful scheme and really a big shift in Norway. And that has to do with taxation. So they introduced lower taxes, but also they were looking at the infrastructure and all the complementary regulatory frameworks that needed to be implemented to make this a success. So the whole package was actually introduced, and we saw an emission reduction in total of 4%. And that doesn't sound much, but that is, if you take into account that it is the on the total emissions, so industry, etc., then that's a lot, I guess. The other example I already mentioned is the sugary drinks. The UK, I actually more or less explained it already. There was a long-term planning, and so before it was actually introduced, it was clear that in 2 years the tax would indeed be introduced and would become applicable. So manufacturers were able to take account of the new situation, and that meant that they were able to come up with new products. It led to a shift in consumer behavior, 29% reduction in the volume of sugary drinks in the UK. In South Africa, which also introduced this kind of tax, it was actually 28%. And you see here 50% manufacturers reducing the sugar content of their drinks following the implementation of the tax in the UK. And then we have alcohol, and there we also see that there are several examples. In the European Union at this moment, alcohol-free beer and low-alcohol beer is very popular. And most brewers are trying to design new beers, new products, which fall in the exemption. And you see it here in the UK, for example. This has become very popular in the EU to drink in a bar. So also very successful. And then my last example are the reduced risk smoking products. And here you also see, if you talk about harm reduction, then normally speaking you would say conventional cigarettes would be subject to the higher duty rate. Heated tobacco products as a less harmful alternative would be subject to a lower duty rate, while vaping products, e-cigarettes, would actually be subject to the lowest duty rate because they are the least harmful of the three products. But there you see three products aimed at the same group of consumers, which normally under this concept should be taxed in this way. Could be taxed, should be taxed in this way. And yeah, the UK has actually introduced this how do you say, this line of thinking behind their tax system on cigarettes and alternative tobacco products. And what you see is that the smoking preference has fallen dramatically in the UK to 13%. And actually, and that was introduced, I think, a month ago. What they are going to do in the UK is they are going to give smokers, a lot of, I think, several hundred of thousand smokers, they will receive free electronic cigarettes in an effort to make them switch to a better and less harmful alternative. So here, several examples. So what you see is that, and you can think about many, many more examples. What you see is that this kind of taxation, how you can work with it, is being applied more and more worldwide. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. Now we will proceed with the moderated discussion. I would like to invite Dr. Carmelo and all the speakers to come in front.
Thank you. So, the last bites of this event, allow me to say that I was very pleased to see the presentation of Benedict with the slides with Ludwig von Mises in it. I have to say that probably I've been in this country long enough to have someone else knowing the work of Ludwig von Mises. Probably 12 years ago when I came here, there were not many people beyond YB One Saiful Wanjan, who is here today, to know who Ludwig von Mises was. So I'm pleased that there is at least one more after 12 years of work and teaching in this country. So I will start then with asking a question to Benedict. He's done a very wonderful presentation centered on the importance of freedom of choice and self-responsibility. So I would ask you, as a potential future policymaker of this country, looking at GEG, okay, the law that is coming, and we see this crusade somehow against not only against tobacco and vaping, but in general against freedom of choice that has been a trend emerged in the country in the past years. I don't doubt the presence of good intentions there, okay? Often the way to hell is paved with good intentions. But what do you see beyond these good intentions behind this crusade that has become the GEG? What do you see in terms of political motivation, economic consideration, and etc.?
So yes, we always talk about good intentions, that policymakers do have good intentions, but I think what is really important is to consider the trade-off analysis. Now, I'll give you a good example. There's a lot of talk about how Malaysian policymakers want to emulate New Zealand
in doing this generational endgame. Now, the thing is that it's important to consider the differences in the approach of New Zealand and Malaysia. First of all, New Zealand has an illicit cigarette market of about 11%, compared with Malaysia, about 50 to 60%, depending on when you set the timeline. 63% for 2020, 2023 is dropped about to 57%. Now the question is, how much will GEG raise the illicit market all the more in Malaysia, especially considering the teenagers who already are smoking? If they are banned, will they eventually look out for illicit markets or supplies instead? There's something to consider, the impact of it. And I think a better approach, rather than banning, would actually be an education of actions and consequences, teaching them to make an informed choice. Now, whenever somebody makes an informed choice, you decide for yourself, you own that choice, and that is much more effective than if a government bans you. Then always there's this concept of the forbidden fruit theory, you know, where because it's forbidden, all the more I want to do it. And of course, all of us were teenagers once in a lifetime. We know that there's this rebellious streak, you know. If the government bans it, why not? There was this roundtable discussion that we had, and somebody brought up, you know, in schools under the mural art, say tak nak merokok, which is say no to smoking. The students are there smoking right in front of the mural art. You know, the irony of it all. So the question is, how do we encourage instead our young teenagers, our young ones, to make informed choices, understanding actions and consequences rather than forcing a ban on them? Yeah.
Thank you. And in fact, talking about forbidden fruit, I mean, my personal experience, I grew up in a family of smokers, of heavy smokers, both my father, my mother. I remember my grandfather holding me on his laps when I was 4 or 5 and inviting me to smoke. Kim, telling some words of wisdom. And my parents have always been very open to smoke. Me and my sister, as always say, don't do stupid things. You want to smoke, cigarettes are there, just ask. In this way, me and my sister never developed that desire for the forbidden fruit, and we never started smoking, indeed, and we never did. So that is for my personal experience. Now I would switch to Dr. Arifin. You have mentioned the importance of for the government to utilize a science-based approach in regulating alternative tobacco products. I would like you to elaborate more on this, in particular on one fact that always there is the perception also in the government that the researches may not be independent, that there are not enough evidence, and the reluctance of the government itself to go into research on alternative nicotine products.
My idea is that all regulation that are going to be formulated must be evidence-based. And in contact with this tobacco harm reduction, I mean this alternative reduced product, there are overwhelming evidence of the safety, the efficacy of it to reduce the smoking prevalence. And these are the things that the government should look into. And based on this evidence, the government should also carry out studies in Malaysia, for example, so that we have the ideas from the evidence overseas. But the problem is that we cannot 100% copy the policies or the regulation that is implemented overseas without seeing at what is happening in our country, what is the situation, the situation in our country. The word is that we are not adopting, but we must adapt. We must adapt the ideas to be suitable to be effective for our country. That's my answer.
Thank you very much. Then, Mr. Samsul, I mean, you have quite an experience in engaging with the governments, but also in observing negative results of policy advocacy in a certain direction and the implementation of certain policies. I'm pretty sure that GEG will not achieve any important target in the fight against smoking. And indeed, Malaysia is already, for those who does not know, is the country with the highest penetration of illicit cigarettes in the world. 6 out of 10 cigarettes consumed in Malaysia are illegal cigarettes. So this is one of the ranking in which Malaysia score first, which is somehow a victory of free market over regulation. But could you elaborate more on some countries which instead were able to develop better policies, more successful policies, and which were the pillars of those policies?
Sure, thank you. I think there are many examples, and these countries, these examples that I'm going to quote, they have a very successful regulation framework which produced the results that they want in regards to smoking prevalence, a reduction in smoking prevalence and all that, is simply because they have accepted the fact that tobacco harm reduction works. This is the first step that everyone has to make. Unfortunately, in Malaysia, the Ministry of Health, from day one that I've been engaging with them, as a matter of policy, I was told by Khairi Jamaluddin and all the other Ministry of Health that, I'm sorry, Sam, we do not accept THR as an accepted tool. Now, if this is a matter of policy from the MOH, how are we going to succeed, right? So if you were to look at UK, for instance, they have wholeheartedly accepted THR as an accepted tool to help people, to curb people to quit smoking, like the tobacco control for England 2017, which has seen a lot of results. And recently that we hear in the news that they have given out 1 million devices, vape devices, to help people to quit smoking. There are many examples, Japan as well, right? So there are many examples. And I've been like holding my tongue for a long time, but I think, can I not hold my tongue now? This is the one thing that I wanted to say. I think the sincerity of the Ministry of Health is in question here. I'm asking them, are you really sincere in helping people to quit smoking, right? And they said yes. So how are you doing? What's the steps that you're doing in helping people to quit smoking? Nicotine patch. That's the answer. Now, I brought to them research to show that nicotine patch do not work, and vape is much more effective in helping people to quit smoking. We see the evidence in New Zealand, we see the evidence in UK, we see the evidence in Japan, we see the evidence everywhere. But then again, you know, coming back to my question here, are you guys really sincere in helping people to quit smoking? Or is it that you have an agenda to help to push nicotine patch? Because as we can see, certain companies, right, are openly funding the Quit Smoking program in Malaysia. Openly, you can check out the website. This is public knowledge. I'm not going to quote any companies, but you can check yourself, right? Why is it that certain pharmaceutical company is funding MOH, right? And MOH is now pushing forward the best way for you to quit smoking is nicotine patch. And until and unless they're sincere in really helping people to quit smoking, and they've been saying that government has to spend the upwards of 6 billion in helping people to you know, all the diseases that comes from smoking. You know, if you're really sincere, then come on, you know, look at THR, tobacco harm reduction. Seriously look at it and sincerely look at it if you really want to help people to quit smoking. Again, as I said, this is really not about the industry. This is really not about the tax revenue. But unfortunately, after 12 years, me engaging with MOH, talking about facts and data and science peer reviews, it didn't work, right? Only when we engaged Minister of Finance, it worked. Thank you.
Thank you. And with the last question to Dr. David, I want to connect the conversation to the topic of today, which is innovation. We have discussed about differential taxation and why it may be quite intuitive to understand how differential taxation can nudge in favor of the consumption of certain products versus others. I would like you to specify more how this system, this fiscal tool, can indeed have positive spillovers on innovation, on investment in R&D and innovation and development of new products, rather than the consumption part, focusing more a little bit on the investment part.
Yeah, I can do that, of course. I think one of the best examples is indeed electric cars, electric vehicles. What we see is that the introduction of these tax schemes in many countries in the world has led, and again, accompanied by a regulatory framework, of course, also. But that has spurred a lot of investments by car manufacturers into electric vehicles. And many car manufacturers already have said, you know, we are going to only produce electric vehicles in the future. And also in the tobacco industry, you see, of course, new products are tobacco products are researched and developed and marketed. So in many industries, the concept leads to investments and innovation, I think.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have time for collecting questions from the public, but so we, Cellini, we have still some time? I can see. So very brief, three, sorry. So, Mr. Joseph, may I skip you because you have done already questions in the previous panel, so we give the words also to someone else. So, Wibing Saiful, and then the friend from Indonesia, then the sir there. So, okay, Saiful.
Thank you. My name is Wan Saiful Wanjan, Member of Parliament for Tasik Blue in Penang. Very interesting to hear your arguments here. I wonder, especially Shamsul on the argument about vape just now. I wonder if any of you have shared the same experience with Shamsul, that you go to one ministry, response is like this, you go to another ministry, response is different. And, is there also any attempt by you to engage with MPs and not just people in government ministries?
Before giving the word to Shamsul, I quote a direct example that I had. We had done some work in research on the consumption of food supplements and vitamins. We have worked with MATSA, the local association here, and they have quoted the same example, that they found Ministry of Finance open to discuss a special treatment for vitamins, but not Minister of Health. So a similar situation on the consumption of vitamin.
YB, if I understand your question correctly, this question is not addressed to me because I do jumpa MOH and MOF and all the MPs. I think these are questions for DRS, right?
Yeah, I can answer that.
But on your case, have you tried to engage with MPs and not just government officials?
Yes, I did. MPs as well, yes.
Yeah, I think...
Now you have one.
Yeah, for us, we also do engage with MPs in terms of advocacy work, but not only just MPs, but also the PSSC, the Parliamentary Special Select Committee on Health, Science and Innovation, which now has been rebranded to PSSC on Health. I think that sometimes it's important to provide them with as much research as we can. I think sometimes our MPs' hands are also tied. They do not have enough researchers to look at different aspects of science-based policies, to collect as much data as they can. They don't have enough time to review the bill. So that it's where we come in to supply them with as much scientific facts as possible, and then let them make the informed decision after that. Yeah.
May I just add on a bit? Unfortunately, when there was a special select committee to discuss about the GEG, we were expecting to have a representation, but unfortunately, we were not allowed to participate.
Okay, our friend from Indonesia.
Yeah. The first I want to...
Apa namanya?
Angga. ANGGA. I will congratulate Samsul Arifin for the persistency that you can make it move the needle. Hope it's keep in the middle, yeah, not moving the other way around. But for Dr. Arifin, I really want to hear from you as a health expert, and how it's actually tobacco harm reduction or e-cigarette or anything can help the addictive aspect from the nicotine. Because in a simple way, because I'm not a health expert, I really want to hear from you how we can understand it to really help people from the addiction.
Actually, as we heard, the principle of harm reduction is not. We are not moving. I mean, we are not trying to stop people from using nicotine, but we are replacing. We are find an alternative to use nicotine in a safer way, in a less harmful way. So, what you should understand is that the biggest harm is from burning of tobacco, is combustion of tobacco. So we in harm reduction, we are trying. I mean, the best thing is to quit nicotine addiction altogether. But as I said just now, nicotine itself is not a very harmful substance. It is sort of a relatively benign substance. And what we want to do now is that for us to make people quit smoking combustible, and for us to quit nicotine addiction, so there are methods. There are many methods. Like I mean, we can tell it down and tell it down, tell the consumption of nicotine down until certain time that we can quit nicotine altogether. But the most important thing that I want to stress again is that if you are addicted to nicotine, but you unable to quit nicotine there and there, you can use nicotine in a safer way. And we are promoting this much less harmful nicotine alternative instead of smoking. Yeah, you can use, and some people say that you can use nicotine as long as you can, as long as you want, until you are ready to stop nicotine altogether.
Last question.
Thailand has been banning vaping since nearly 10 years ago, 2014 maybe. So what's happening there? Does it work? I don't know. Because you say that vaping is good alternative. You are promoting vaping, which is unsurprised. So Thailand has been doing it. So Thailand might have been doing something very, very wrong according to your belief.
Right. We are also a member of KPRA, which is an Asia Pacific non-profit organization. So we have meetings, monthly meetings from members, NGO members in Thailand, in Singapore, in New Zealand, in India. So we are very well abreast on what's going on in Thailand. So let me just put this point here. Whenever there's a country that the government owns a large portion of the cigarette production, there tend to be a bit of a problem there, right? So currently in Thailand, you can vape, you can sell vape products, you can even vape in public. You cannot do that. But the feedback that I've been getting from my friends who's doing advocacy work in Indonesia, they're doing all they can, and the needle is moving ever so slowly over there. And same thing is happening in China as well. China, just for our information, is one of the biggest vape producers in the world, but then the government is now stepping in to make it very difficult for the current manufacturers to manufacture vape products in China, and because they want to take over the production of vape products. The government want to take over because it's a big business. Now, there's an opportunity here. We've been talking to them, and we tell them that come over to Malaysia. We are about to be regulated. Put your factories here, right? And we're going to give you tax exemption or whatever. And it's all up to the government. So this is what's happening currently. Not many people know about what's going on in China right now, but the government is now clamping down on current manufacturers. They're making it very difficult for the local manufacturers there. And I've been contacted by almost close to 15 manufacturers now. They are huge. We are talking about they are billion-dollar companies. They are now really considering to come over to Malaysia. They are looking at Vietnam. They are looking at Indonesia. So YB, I think you have to look at this and FDI. Yeah.
Yeah, so you answered from the industry side, just answer from the consumer side. I just Googled this name, Charlene Au. What happened was she was a Taiwanese actress that was recently, there was a scandal in Thailand. She was caught, it seems that she had a vaping device on her. And what happened was, she said that the enforcement officer was the one that planted the vaping device on her. They checked it out, and it's true enough, it was proven that there was corruption in that case. What that serves as a case study for us in Malaysia is if we were to do the same with GEG, how will it possibly be abused by enforcement officers? For example, to get a bribe, because the fines are quite high. At the moment, the previous bill in its entirety, the fines and the punitive punishments are actually quite stringent. So will that result in a raise of bribes or extortionary efforts, for example? Now, this is something that we need to think about, because this case went viral and it stirred up the debate again in Thailand, whether the ban on vaping is really leading to a lot of unintended consequences. Yeah. That one I'm not too sure, whether it increases in Thailand or not.
In a nutshell, I think we can conclude on that regulation that becomes over-regulation and over-strict bring obviously more occasions for corruption on one side. The other side is something that we had touched upon in one of our papers, is we as human beings are pleasure seekers. So the moment in which pleasure consumption is banned is not a way for us to consume less pleasure, but to find a different and illegal way to consume the same pleasure. So the philosophy that we are trying to promote, at least as a CME on harm reduction, is we can't go against human nature. We don't have all the vocation to be monks and therefore to frustrate our pleasure consumption. It is completely natural as human beings to look for pleasure consumption. How do we strike a balance between pleasure consumption and protecting our health? And that is where innovation comes into play. So looking not to ban pleasure, why we should do that? As Ben mentioned in his presentation, tomorrow it could be coffee, sugar. Can be red meat. Now there are people saying red meat bring cancer. I'm an Italian, can be pasta because carbs now are considered the enemy of health. So 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the Mediterranean diet was considered the most healthier diet in the world. Now don't mention carbs. Oh my God, they are going to kill you. And I have also quite some objection on this kind of statistics. These kind of things are going to kill you. I mean, we are alive, and therefore we are going to die. So life ultimately is going to kill us. It's just the way in which statistics are played around to find that something is going eventually to kill us faster. But somehow we are all going to die. Let's allow innovation. So prohibition is going to make our life less worth to be lived, because we are going to eliminate the pleasure part of life. So that's what's the point of life at all. Innovation can make pleasure consumption less harmful. That's all the point we are trying to make with our conversation. So thank you very much. I think we can conclude this panel. I think we have the ritual pictures with all the panelists. Yeah. Thank you. Now, while I ask the panelists to take the seat, I will ask you to bear with me for 5 more minutes. So, Salini, I take the mic directly. Okay. I just want to call on stage all the people that with me are somehow involved in CME, not only in Malaysia, but also at regional level. So, Professor Anderson, who is a CME fellow, please come over. Professor Renato is also a CME fellow. Come over. Razim Ismail, one of our directors. Alfian from Indonesia is our country manager, is in Indonesia. And then Sammy, our accountant. Nick, our project coordinator. Benedict is also one of our fellows. Consilts, another one of our fellows. Cellini has been cooperating with us in an informal way, I would say, so she's part of the family as well. I ask you all a round of applause for these people that cooperate with us, most of the time on a voluntary basis, doing the effort to promote some scientific effort and to contribute to the policy conversation in here. But what I want to communicate is mostly with the presence of Alfian here, is that indeed we are moving regional. So we have started in 2019 as a small, very small think tank. We were incorporated in 2020. We have done a lot of online things because we were during the pandemic. We have had as our guests even Robert Barro from Harvard, Dave McCloskey from Chicago, and etc. Then somehow I've been dragged into the policy conversation, which was not the reason why I set up CME, but we are there. And we are trying to bring our approach, which is trying to communicate in an easy way that market-friendly solutions are better for the people rather than centrally planned ones at regional level. Alfian has contributed to a big research in Indonesian economic and business outlook that was recently published together with Universitas Prasetya Mulia. We are discussing what to do in Taiwan with Professor Anderson as well. And we are having 2 very important educational initiatives. So we are going back for a while to more intellectual webinars. So the 20th of June, we will have a webinar with Professor Lawrence White from George Mason University, who has just published a book with Cambridge University Press, Better Money, Fiat, Gold, or Bitcoin. So a very important topic. And this will be on the 20th of June. There will be communication on our website and social media at this regard. And we are doing it under the umbrella of CME Indonesia, in cooperation with ASB again, with the Master in Central Banking and Professor Hans. So will be another event that we do together with ASB, so another prestigious cooperation for us. And the last news probably will be in the first week of July. Yesterday I got a message from Professor Edmund Phelps, who is Nobel laureate in economics 2006, that accepted to present his latest book, My Journeys in Economic Theory, with us. So we will have a session with a Nobel laureate. So considering again our rickety and a bit, you know, like a car, like this young organization, I think we are doing a lot of interesting things, and we hope that you can keep on contributing, supporting us with your participation. Thanks again to all our sponsors and supporters, and hope to have more things in the future in Taiwan, in Indonesia. For Taiwan, we are discussing even on a permanent summer school on innovation. See, inshallah, we are going to make it if our sponsors keep on sponsoring us. And thank you very much, and see you again soon. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, okay. Squeezing. Wait, 2 lines? 2 lines?
Okay, ready everyone? Ready, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3. One more, can I have thumbs up for this program? Ready, 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Yes.
I lost sense, I lost tactile sensation. Thank you very much.